Hello everyone, and welcome to the Fictional Vortex. So we are back with an interesting movie on What If Naruto Awakens 2000 Years Old Kenshiro Power. But before we start, I just want to remind you to please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button if you enjoy my content. Let's start the story. Chapter 1. First off, let me assure you all that my other works will still be updated. It's just I like to focus on new ideas as soon as they pop into my skull. I'm most appreciative of all the responses to spoiler, so here it is, the full first chapter. What? Fell in a tumultuous flood around the valley, slowly eating away at the surrounding rock. On either side of this mighty fall, two figures stood, features carved from the surrounding rock, eye to eye as if in combat. Below them, two figures of flesh and blood glared at each other with a passion that could only be compared to those of the statues. They each stood upon the foot of one statue, facing across from the falls. One held in his hands a sphere of rotating blue light, enveloped in a fiery red ore that reeked of some inner, deeper evil. The other, his body warped into some grotesque monstrosity, held in his hands a crackling bolt of lightning. Red slitted pupils locked onto red tomo-encircled ones, as the two figures leapt across the chasm, driven more by what burned within them than by any rational thought. Chidori, quote, Rasengan, Naruto. Konoha Shinken Chapter 1, Successor. He awoke with a cry, sweating profusely, his heart thundering in his chest, blonde bangs trailing against his face. The same dream. Again, he muttered, holding a palm to his eyes to try and calm himself, shaking sweat from his golden locks. They've been coming more and more frequently. The figure stood from his bed and walked to the window, pushing the shutters open to gaze out at the moon shining down. There was something calming about the sun's celestial companion, something that, for reasons unknown to him, brought to mind the faint memory of a timid, pale-eyed figure with blue hair. But as soon as he reached to draw on the image, it blurred away like all the others. Just a dream, he whispered, rubbing the scar over his heart, a jagged patch of flesh that had healed to leave a spiral scar, like a whirlpool, just a dream. The sound of a shogi door pushing open alerted the teen to the arrival of a massive man with shoulder-length brown hair. He stood dressed in a pair of training bottoms and shoes, and held a towel over his shoulder. "You're awake?" the man asked, looking none too surprised. "The dreams again?" The blonde nodded, subconsciously rubbing the scar as he looked back to the moon, sighing as it was hidden behind a passing cloud. "They've been coming increasingly more often," he admitted, looking up at the sky calmly, "and always seem to fade as quickly as they arrive." It had been a steadily increasing problem for the man, his sleep constantly been disturbed by irregular flashes of unknown places, sounds and people, the most consistent being a village full of scowls and whispers, and the scene from the waterfall, where two beings clashed with phenomenal power. The massive brunette nodded, understanding the smaller man's dilemma somewhat, before turning in the doorway and clearing his throat. "I'm heading for the training hall," he explained. "Wash up and join me for morning practice." "Hi, Ryu-sensei," the blonde replied, bowing respectfully, before turning to the dresser to gather his clothes and bathing utensils. Settled in the side of a mountain range, surrounded on all sides by rugged paths and forests, the temple was hidden from all eyes but those that knew how to find it. Many people had sought it, either to verify its existence or wrest whatever treasures had been accumulated within, be they gold or scrolls. All who had attempted such had failed, either due to lack of information, courage, or by falling victim to the numerous hazards that surrounded it, both natural and hidden. Here it was that the two lived, trained and isolated themselves for the sole purpose of perfecting their art. The scarred man exhaled as he shifted from push-ups to a handstand, continuing his regiment with handstand push-ups, sweat dripping from his frame onto the floor. The hall echoed with the sounds of his regular breaths, the statues of HFUL deities gazing down at him in silent testimony of his progress. He recalled the first time he'd laid eyes on them, how he'd felt a shiver run up his spine at those cold, empty eyes, covered with the dust of centuries, looking down upon him. Now they gave silent witness to his progress, watching as he not only met their silent expectations, but surpassed them, as countless others had before. The man grunted and flipped to his feet, lifting one leg and practiced kicking at his shadow. Sweat continued to fall in droplets, highlighting the toned muscles of his arms and flank. He grimly recalled Ed the state he'd been in when he'd first set foot in the temple, and dimly tried to recall how many years it had been since Ryu-sensei had rescued him from the river. He shivered at this grim memory, recalling all too well the cold, tumultuous waters that had seemed determined to claim him as their own. His body had been battered, bruised, and his mouth salty from the taste of blood he later realized was his own. He recalled desperate gasps for air, futile pawing with arms that seemed as dull and lifeless as lead, one shoulder absolutely refusing to work after being slammed against a jutting boulder. Just as he had surrendered though, just as he prepared to sink beneath the unforgiving waters, a pair of massive hands punched through the water, grabbed the tattered remains of his clothes and bodily tore him from the water's grasp, into the light and air he'd so desperately sought but moments before. Even to this day the blonde marveled at the sheer size and strength of his massive sensei, who stood a good 4 feet just sitting on the floor, legs crossed. The man claimed he got his physique from his father. If such were the case, then the younger man felt certain he'd never want to meet him. He finished, exhaling slowly as he lowered his foot to the floor, feeling steam rise off him in small waves. He subconsciously reached up to his chest, wincing at the scar, tracing the ridges almost reverently. Not for the first time. His sensei had no knowledge of any attack which could both burn and pierce the skin in such a manner, and so they never spoke of it, simply passing it off. As fortunate the river had not claimed him. Koryu, his sensei had named him, after the river he'd been scooped out of, though once after training the giant had joked, claiming it also stood for, Child of Ryu. For the longest time, Koryu had wondered if there was some hidden meaning in the man's words, for both knew there were no ties of blood between them. Regardless, Ryu had been master, furry, and father to him since bringing him to the temple, had initiated him into the way of his art, and had passed unto him his most precious knowledge. But recently, the master was growing strangely distant of late, disappearing for long periods of time down the mountain, where Koryu was strictly forbidden from setting foot. Every time he would return, he would resume his duties as master, but Koryu had long learned that any questioning would be ignored, the massive man merely falling silent. He exhaled again, reaching down for a canteen and towel he'd brought with him, taking a long draught, before pouring a good dose over his head. Shaking his head to clear it somewhat, he dried himself off, rotating his neck to the sound of popping joints. Sensei wanted to see me in the main hall, he recalled, toweling off and heading back to his room. I'd best not keep him waiting. Ryu eyed the smaller man as he kneeled before him respectfully. Gone were the layers of baby fat which had been prominent in his youth. Gone was the look of weakness, a result of the river's harsh treatment. All that remained of the fragile youth he'd pulled from the water were the blue eyes, the scar over his heart, and the strange, whisker-like birthmarks that graced the once rounded cheeks. Ryu felt oddly intrigued by the marks, as they had given the youth an almost comical, if not fitting, vulpine appearance. Now full grown, the markings gave him the air of a full-grown fox, crafty as hell, and ready to fight or flee as the situation arose. Not that he will ever need to flee, the giant thought assuredly, not with the level of skill he possesses. Koryu, he spoke at last, 10 years have passed since I pulled a youth, half drowned and wounded, from the river below. Koryu nodded, marveling at the sheer amount of time that had passed since that day so long ago. Since then, I have taken you in, raised you as both my pupil and son. A glimmer of emotion entered the man's eyes, as he gazed fondly at the blonde. Your growth has been phenomenal, and I couldn't have felt prouder if you were my own son. Koryu sat up straighter at this. Ryu was not one to give false praise, for the giant master to admit this much. He must be building up to something important. Ryu looked into the smaller man's eyes and nodded. Our art has stood firm for over 2,000 years, the giant explained, and in those 2,000 years, each master has surpassed all who came before him. He frowned, climbing to his feet, but the law of the school dictates that there can only be one master of the style, and that it be passed from master to student, father to child. Koryu blinked, looking up at his sensei in confusion, earning a chuckle from the man. Did you ever wonder why I chose that particular name for you? Ryu questioned. I was, at one point, married. He looked saddened for a moment. My wife was pregnant with our child when she fell in the river, and I was too far away to assist her. The giant stood silently for a moment, before turning to the youth impassively. "It was no coincidence that I passed the river that day. I come there every day to pay my respects to their resting place." He turned and walked to the doors. Massive wrought iron structures which nonetheless could be opened with effort. "Come." Koryu eyed the surroundings warily, his mind buzzing with the knowledge of what he'd just been told. He had never even dreamed that Ryu had been a father, let alone married. The massive man was the sole constant in the blonde's life, like some immovable boulder in the rapids that had long ago sought his life. The mere thought of him being hurt or atoning for some past weakness seemed inconceivable to the blonde. He blinked as he noticed that Ryu had come to a halt, noting that they were deep into the mountains which surrounded the temple. The path was littered with pebbles and coarse, thorny bushes, signifying that little more than the local goats frequented these treacherous paths. In front of them lay a pit, circular in nature and a good 20 feet deep. Before the blonde could even think of questioning the giant, he felt one of the man's massive hands grabbed him by the shoulder. Before being lifted off his feet and bodily tossed into the pit, only the blonde's training allowing him to land without injuring himself. "This will be the final test I will ever give you," Ryu called out, looking down at the confused blonde with his arms crossed, eyes devoid of any emotion. "While I highly doubt you can't climb out of a pit this small, doing so without completing the test will result in failure. In which case, I've been wasting my time." He stepped on a protruding rock, causing it to sink into the ground and heralding a strange clanking noise. Koryu spun round to witness steel bars dropping into the ground, bearing a hole in the wall, from which the sound of low growling echoed. The blonde felt his hackles rise as something began padding towards him with sinewy grace. Slowly, rumbling low in its throat, the massive Bengal tiger entered the pit, eyeing the blonde warily. Koryu slowly shifted into a fighting stance, eyeing the tiger warily as it tried to circle him. The blonde refused to let the giant beast take the rear, and so turned to ensure their eyes were locked together. The beast growled, low in its throat, and tried to break eye contact, only to find its gaze drawn back to those blue orbs, a stark contrast to its own amber gaze. Letting out another small growl, the big cat changed directions abruptly, eyeing the teen cautiously, as if it were facing another tiger. Koryu merely exhaled slowly, allowing his aura to slowly flow out with the breath, hands posed to defend himself as he retained a lock on the beast's eyes. Slowly, he allowed his aura to come off him in waves, washing against the sides of the pit like water as he maintained his position, never breaking his gaze away from the tigers. The great beast growled low in its throat, before slowly lowering itself to the floor, placing its head on its paws and closing its eyes, accepting the inevitable willingly and without a fight. Koryu, still releasing his aura, approached the beast and kneeled next to its flank, running a hand across the striped hide. "Sumimasen," he whispered, before pressing a particular point on the tiger's flank, earning a low rumble from the beast that trailed off as its heart slowly came to a peaceful stop. Up on the lip of the pit, Ryu nodded as he watched his student stroke the beast's head, smoothing the fur almost reverently. "It is never easy," the giant acknowledged solemnly, watching as the blonde continued his ministrations to the beast's carcass, "but in doing this, he has proven himself worthy." "Koryu," he called out, catching the smaller man's attention, "climb out of that pit and meet me back at the temple." And with that the giant sensei turned on his heel, making his way back down the path with the ease of long practice. Koryu turned to face the wall, prepared to make his escape when something made him pause. Turning on his heel, he eyed the peaceful form of the tiger, so calm in death it appeared to be sleeping, lying on the floor where he left it. "It isn't right," Koryu muttered, eyeing the once proud beast sadly, leaving it to rot here, just for the sake of training. Frowning in resolution, the blonde walked over to the corpse, grabbing a fistful of hide and, with a grunt, spun round, hurling the corpse out of the pit. That done, he proceeded to climb out himself, the pit being deep, but far from smooth, thus providing decent handholds for those who knew where to look. The corpse was waiting for him as he finally climbed over the edge, still warm but cooling slowly in the mountain air. "Koryu," Yu grunted as he hefted the beast's massive frame over his shoulder, its hind legs trailing in the dirt as he began to walk, carefully mindful of his footing, down the winding path. "I'll see to it you receive a decent burial." Koryu promised, lugging the corpse round the path towards the temple, eyes focused. Not even a beast deserves to lie forgotten. You're late, Ryu stated, frowning slightly as he eyed the man before him. Don't tell me you had difficulty getting back. Koryu shook his head, but refused to elaborate, causing the giant to take in the blonde's frame carefully, before nodding. The first kill is always the hardest, he admitted, eyeing a smudge of dirt the blonde had failed to remove from his person, and it should never become easy, lest you lose that most vital part of your being, your humanity. Koryu followed his sensei's gaze and inwardly cursed as he noticed the telltale smudge of soil. Do not fret, Ryu stated as the younger man flinched, while I am surprised you chose to bury it. I do not hold your respect for the tiger against you. He nodded, catching the blonde's blue orbs with his own. In battle, you will face many opponents, some good, some evil, with each. There is always the potential for respect between you. He nodded, rubbing a scar that adorned his neck, a smile coming to his features. Always recall such fights with care, for a respectful opponent should never be forgotten. Koryu nodded, glad that he was in no trouble for what might have been considered a moment of weakness, only to blink as Ryu suddenly bowed before him. Koryu, with this last test, I have nothing further to teach you. The giant acknowledged, bowing with his head to the ground. All that is left for you is to hone your skills in the world, carrying nothing but your name and the honor of our school above all else. The giant raised his head and placed his hands on his knees, eyes solemn yet burning with some inner pride. On my honor as the current master of our school, Ryu recited. Keeping his eyes on his pupils, I acknowledge you as the 66th successor of Hokuto Shinken. He smiled solemnly at the smaller man, a look of pride on his face. I wish you well, my son. Koryu bowed to his master, friend and father, and now apparent equal, accepting the title and the respect it carried gratefully and with appreciation. I thank you for all you have shown me, Ryu-sensei. He lifted his head and smiled at the man. I will not forget what I have learned. Ryu nodded, before reaching behind him, pulling a wrapped bundle from behind his back. The material was plain cloth, and whatever lay within it couldn't have weighed much, as it was passed from master to pupil without either seeming surprised. Out of all the belongings you possessed when I fished you out of the river, these are all that seem salvageable. He nodded as the youth began to unwrap the bundle. They may provide a clue as to your past. Koryu blinked as something fell out of the bundle, sliding onto the floor with a faint tinkle. Looking down revealed a necklace, composed of 2 silver lumps and a single green stone, shaped like a crystal. For a fleeting moment, the blonde's throat closed, as a vision of an oddly maternal figure hovered at the edge of sight, the ghost of lips alighting on his forehead, before vanishing as quickly as they came. Shaking himself, the blonde gripped the necklace firmly in his hand, before turning his attention to the second of the items, tracing the metal that adorned with a straggly curiosity. It was a worn, tattered blue headband, the fabric long ruined by the rough treatment it had received from the river and poor treatment. The metal on the headband was edged with rust, dust and dents, but the symbol in the center proved unblemished by time. Koryu traced the spiral motif, edged by a semi-triangle, a leaf. He wondered Bryfly, before feeling his breath sweep away as yet another image flooded into his mind. This time it was of a man, relatively young, eyes closed and smiling as the sun rose behind him. A scar adorned the man's face, across the nose and under each eye, and his hair was done up in a ponytail. He fell. Ghostly fingers ruffle his blonde locks, the smile on the man's face both proud and warm, before both faded from memory. Koryu, he heard his sensei ask tentatively, and became aware of the tears that rolled down his cheeks. Blinking in awe as he tried to figure out what could have caused such a thing. I remembered something, Koryu admitted, shaking his head slightly as the familiar pain surfaced behind his eyes, faint images. He recalled, 1 woman, 1 man. Your parents? Ryu asked, looking at the youth in concern, hope and a small measure of unease, only to receive a shake of the head in reply. You can't tell. Koryu covered his eyes with his free hand, the other still holding the necklace tightly. I felt as though they were important to me, but I could barely make out their faces. He eyed the 2 articles of clothing carefully, before pulling the necklace over his head, feeling at ease with the stone around his neck. Ryu nodded, before getting to his feet. You will rest, he ordered. Tomorrow you may set out on your journey. He smiled at the shorter man. Perhaps you will learn of your origins on the way. Koryu looked at the headband again, and fingered the green gemstone around his neck. Eyes focusing on the insignia with grim determination. I will discover what this means. He vowed, and the names of the faces that haunt my dreams. Next chapter. Koryu sets out on his journey. With little else to his name but the blessings of his master, the clothes on his back, and the enigmatic articles he received the night before. Will he receive the answers he seeks? Or will a freak encounter with a pack of bandits cut the late successor of the 2,000-year legacy of Hokuto in his prime? Koryu. Ome wa mo, Shindiru. Chapter 2. Response to this FIC is going a lot better than anticipated. So without further ado, here's the next chapter of Koryu's journey. Note, if you have any questions, please feel free to send them in a review. I never go back, on my word. The blonde gasped between breaths, before smirking up at the feral-looking teen with the hooded coat. So if you try to come between me and the Hokage title, you better prepare to be beaten like the dog you are. The feral-looking teen responded by summoning to what appeared to be his twin, the two lunging at the blonde, spinning in midair to create miniature tornadoes. Gatsuga. Naruto. Konoha Shinken Chapter 2, Journey. Koryu tightened his gloves, double-checked the latches on his boots and nodded, tucking the necklace under the black t-shirt he was wearing, before pulling on a sleeveless jacket and picking up a duffel bag. The blonde eyed himself in the mirror one last time, taking in the animal-like marking on his face for what wouldn't be the last time, before smiling resignedly and walking out the door. Shutting the shogi panel behind him, the room losing what little aura of life he had brought to it. So determined was the blonde's desire to leave without a fuss, that he was completely caught off guard when he found Ryu was waiting for him in the main hall. The giant man was wearing traditional training robes and holding what looked like a cloak in his massive hands. An all-knowing look proving the blonde's suspicions correct. I came to see you off, the giant man explained, wrapping the garment around his one-time pupil, smiling softly as the smaller man flinched in protest at the apparent coddling. Take this as well, he added, handing the shorter man a folded map. I had to pull in a few favors to get a relevant map of the land, so don't lose it. Koryu looked up at his sensei gratefully, before accepting the paper and grabbing the man's massive arm in a hand grip. Ryu smiled grimly and returned the action, the two locking gazes, before embracing as only brothers could. I will pray, Ryu promised, looking down at his charge as they separated, hands on his shoulders as he regarded him solemnly. Not for me, the blonde promised, earning a laugh from his sensei. As well as twin claps on the shoulder. I'll be seeing you, sensei. He offered in arting, before walking towards the giant doors of the main hall, and down the mist-shrouded path of the mountain. Out into the unknown, danger-ridden world he had been preparing for. May the seven sisters of Hokuto watch over you, Ryu swore, before turning back to the temple, closing his yes reverently as he lit incense at the shrine. Was it this hard for you, Kenshiro? Sensei. Koryu grunted as he sheltered his eyes from the spray, cursing as some got past his guard, causing him to blink rapidly to clear it. I see you're as savage as always, he muttered, glaring at the offender sarcastically. The 66th heir of Hokuto had chosen to make a brief side trip to the same river Wick. H had attempted to claim his life all those years ago. The turbulent waters frothed madly as they flowed past, as if angered at his presence. Turning his back to the river, he located the reason for this detour. A small shrine stood within a carved alcove, not far from where he had been rescued, just as his sensei had told him. 2 incense candles, sheltered from wind and rain by the alcove, were burning faintly before 2 prayer tablets, which the blonde regarded respectfully. Your husband is doing well, he assured the larger of the two, bowing slightly before it, and though I never knew either of you, I am glad to have met the man we all came to cherish. Clapping his hands reverently in front of his face, Koryu bowed once more, placing some mountain plants he'd picked as an offering, along with one of the tiger fangs he'd liberated from the beast's corpse. A gift for the son whose name I inherited, he stated, placing the fang before the smaller of the 2 tablets. I ask you loan it to me for a little longer, until I reclaim my own. With that, he bowed one last time, before turning on his heel and walking down the path, alongside the river. Behind him, the incense candles fluttered slightly, as some gentle breeze passed the shrine. Several days later, the captain of the Tsukiheim grimaced as he looked out over the waters. It wasn't that he was nervous about a little bad weather, far from it. He lived for the adrenaline rush only a storm could instill in a man. It wasn't even the suspicious character they'd picked up back at court. The cloaked wanderer with the hood that hid all but his eyes, which watched everyone like those of a hawk. It wasn't even the fact that the cook was planning on serving fish stew again, though this was a relevant cause for concern, given the state of the fish they had left in the larder. No, it was the rumor that something big was going on in the Wave Country, something that this old sea dog wanted no part of, something to do with a group of Tosei nin that had set up shop around the border of the now bustling town, making it hard for anything other than trading ships to get in and out. "Captain," the first mate asked, catching the older man's attention as he climbed up the steps to the wheel, "there's something about that cloaked guy the first don't like." "Like what?" the captain asked, not looking away from the horizon, a smirk crossing his weathered features. He turned ya down to harshly. The cloaked figure looked in the direction of the mate, spluttering, tilting his head in interest at the man's reaction to the captain's ribbing. "Hey, I'm spoken for," the mate chastised, getting over his embarrassment and holding up his ring finger to prove it, "to a cute young thing in Wave Country actually," he added, almost reproachfully. The captain turned his head slightly, looking pleasantly surprised. "Oh really? How long's this been under wraps?" he asked, "and why wasn't I invited to the wedding?" "About 5 years now," the first mate replied, smiling at the ring serenely. "We hooked up the first time we landed in Wave." He smiled and scratched his head, "and I didn't think you'd care for that sort of thing. Never turned down a chance for free booze." The captain replied sagely, "Anyways, she must be some lass to be puttin' up with the likes o' you, my lord." "Tht she is," the mate replied with a smile, "and I've a daughter waiting for me too." "How old?" Quote. The two looked up in surprise, noticing the hooded traveler eyeing them with interest. About 4, the mate replied, looking at the man carefully. He-ho, had he hadn't insulted the man in some way, in case they were transporting some missing nin. The figure merely nodded at the response, before reaching into his cloak and tossing something to the mate. "A good luck charm," he called out. "The area I'm from makes them." The mate blinked, looking down at the thin copper charm before nodding gratefully. "Thank you, sir," he said gratefully, feeling guilty at his earlier suspicion. "Will you be needing anything? What can you tell me about the land of waves?" The cowled figure replied, "It is my first time there and I would like to know what to expect when I land." "Well," the captain thought, pursing his lips, "it weren't so long ago that we avoided the place, cause Gato and his thugs setting up shop there." Noticing the look of confusion on the cowled man's face, he frowned. "Ain't you never heard of Gato?" "I've been out of touch," the cowled man replied, earning a nod from the captain in understanding. Well, Gato used to run quite the shipping empire," the captain muttered, "but his main modus operandi was to extort small villages until they'd no choice but to work fair nothing." He spat over the side. "Bastard even hired nuke nin from the hidden villages, killing them off if they outlived their usefulness. Things got so bad that the mayor, Tazuna, who was only a bridge builder at the time mind you," the mate continued, "ed out to hire a bunch of ninja from Konoha, that's the Hidden Leaf village, to help out." The cowled figure flinched at the mention of Hidden Leaf, before shaking his head and motioning for the men to continue. "Well anyways," the captain rumbled, "within a week, not only does Gato lose his life, but that old bilge rat Tazuna finishes his bridge and names it after one of the ninja he hired." He scowled slightly and crossed his eyes. "Some kid named, what was it?" he wondered. "Something to do with fish." "Naruto, sir," the mate replied helpfully. "He called it the Great Naruto Bridge, and it's the largest bridge in the history of the elemental nations." "Daft thing to name a bridge," the captain muttered, "and whoever heard of a ninja with a name like that? Sounds like some sort of ramen topping." He blinked as he noticed the stranger's sudden silence and looked over. "You okay, lad?" The figure shook slightly, before waving a hand in dismissal. "Just haven't got my sea legs yet," he assured them, earning a chuckle from the men as they nodded and went about their business, the mate clapping him comradely on the shoulder as he passed. Landing in port proved a tedious affair, for Wave hadn't become the trade center of the elemental companies for nothing. Each ship had to be escorted in by a small ferry, wherein they were asked to produce the necessary docking permits before declaring their cargo. Koryu watched the sailors running about from his position on the deck, strategically positioned where he could watch everything that was going on without directly getting underfoot. The blonde had developed a new respect for the foul-mouthed, sure-footed men that so nimbly climbed the rigging even in the harshest weather, and marveled most of all at how they could maintain air footing without upsetting their stomachs. "I shall never like boats," he swore, knowing it was childish but figuring he was owed a little childishness after what he'd been through, his stomach voicing its own displeasure. Though that might have been Rom the fish stew. "Well, that's Wave country," the mate called out, catching the blonde's attention as he came down the steps, "and I dare say you'll be glad to be rid of us." "I'll be content to be rid of this damnable boat," Koryu muttered, looking out at the land solemnly. "I've never really liked water very much." "The sea can be cruel," the mate acknowledged. "I've seen more good men go over the sides in a storm than I'd care to admit." He looked out to the horizon and smiled, "but nothing can beat the beauty of a clear sky and a smooth sea. Especially when the moon shines bright in the sky." "You should have been a poet," Koryu noted, earning a chuckle from the mate as he scratched his head. The captain tells me such all the time," the man admitted, smiling at his wedding ring, "and it was my mouth that earned my Aya's love, not my muscles." Koryu nodded solemnly, then looked up as the gang plan was run down, getting to his feet with a grunt. "I wish you all luck," he muttered, "but I'll die a happy man if I never set foot on the sea again." The mate laughed and muttered something that sounded suspiciously like landlubber, before turning to bark an order up the rigging. Koryu ran his eyes over the crowds as he passed, keeping his senses on high alert. For a town apparently under siege, the village of Waves seemed to be fairly peaceful. Children ran in the streets, under the watchful eyes of what appeared to be an old healer woman. Traders shouted their wares for all to hear, some even arguing with our customers over the price of said wares. The blonde watched in aloof amusement as a fight broke out between what looked to be the local fishmonger and blacksmith, the former trying to clout his oppon and with a rather poignant-smelling tuna, whilst the latter was waving a hammer around with clear intent to bash the other's brains in. From the looks of bemusement on the locals' faces, this was a Mon ritual and wasn't going to be broken up anytime soon. Tilting his head to the side to dodge a stray salmon as it flew past, the blonde ran his gaze over the rest of the area, trying to find some clue as to what had drawn him here. Of all the places he could have gone, this quaint trading village had seemed the most attractive, not for the business prospects or tourism, but simply because it had a history with this so-called Konoha. The mere mention of the word sent equal amounts of pain and longing up the man's spine, but the only clue towards it was the headband which, if what he'd gathered was right, all Konoha citizens wore. The sailors from the arriving ships were mingling easily with the crowd, some having family and or spouses waiting for them. Koryu allowed a smile to cross his features as he spotted the mate from his own ship scooping up a little girl and twirling her around, whilst a dark-haired woman laughed at them, hands on her hips. "New in town," a voice called out, causing him to turn and notice the team that had appeared next to him, dressed in working clothes and a crossbow at his hip. "If you're looking for an inn, there's one that way," he offered, pointing towards a rather plain-looking building with shuttered windows. Koryu nodded in thanks, before turning to walk towards the inn, only to be blocked by what appeared to be men in armor. "Passport papers please," the leader asked, holding out a hand as the others tightened their grip on their spears. "What's this all about?" Koryu asked, looking at the men warily, earning a careful glare from the two spearmen. "A precaution," the leader replied. "You don't look like a trader or a sailor, and we can't have any hired thugs sneaking out and alerting the Tosei Nin about the defenses." He held out his hands again. "Now, your papers please." Koryu sighed and shook his head, holding out his hands. "I don't have any," he replied honestly, "nor do I wish to cause trouble, so you may as well take me in." The leader looked at him inquisitively, before nodding and signaling to the other two, one of whom took hold of Koryu's bag, the other clapping a set of cuffs on him. "Sorry for the trouble Inari Dono," the leader said to the youth, who was looking none too pleased. "I know you don't like the way things are done, but until the Tosei Nin are gone, we can't be too careful." Koryu froze as the Y. Oath's name caused several sparks to dance behind his eyeballs, an image of a bawling child with a hat on his head and grubby overalls coming to mind, before being led away, quickly but not forcibly. Can't say we get many like your sort. The L captain muttered as he sat at the desk, filling in forms. Most of the ones we bring in either start ranting about their innocence or demanding a lawyer. He looked across at the silent form of Koryu, as he sat in a lotus stance, meditating in the middle of the cell. The blonde-haired man had allowed himself to be locked in without a fuss, and had not moved from the spot since the guards had left. "Hey, you awake?" the captain asked, looking at the figure in confusion, wondering if it was some ploy to arrange an escape. "Yes, I am," Koryu replied. "I'm merely meditating." He opened his eyes and looked at the guard solemnly. "Is there anything I can help you with?" The guard snorted, before pushing his chair within 10 feet of the cell and pulling out a notepad. "Well, let me see," he muttered, licking his pen. "You say your name is Koryu, and that you're a clanless wanderer." He ran his eyes down the list. "You say you left the temple you were living in to explore the world, and that you had no intentions of staying longer than was necessary." "That is true," Koryu replied, nodding his head in agreement. "Is there anything else you need to ask of me?" The guard looked at him in confusion, before shaking his head and snorting in laughter. "If all my guests were like you," he muttered, before shaking his head and nodding as the other guards marched in. "What do you want for lunch?" "I don't wish to be a bother," Koryu replied. "I'll have whatever the rest of you are having." "Ramen it is then," the guard shrugged. "Hope you like miso, that's all my budget can afford." Far outside the camp, in an area which had come to be known as the camp of the Tosei Nin, the bandits were pigging out and reveling, passing the sake and women around freely. Though there was the odd scuffle. "So tell us, Waraji," one of the bandits muttered to another, "how was it you ended up here?" "Ain't no secret," another mocked, tossing back a sake bottle. "Him and Pretty Boy ran off with their tails between their legs after Gato bit the dust." Waraji, a scarred samurai with an eye patch, growled low in his throat and stood to challenge the man. "Mate, Waraji," an elegant voice called out from behind. "Do not raise your sword against your brothers." The scarred samurai winced and turned, eyeing the figure behind him with trepidation. The man was stripped to the waist, his bare chest a plethora of oiled muscle and scars. His features were cultured and calm, framed by long, black tresses. The only mar being the long diagonal scar that ran across his face and down his collar. A woman graced both his sides, one holding a sake cup to his lips, the other tempting him with a piece of sushi. "Kido-sama," the swordsman began, only to trail off as the man held up a hand, silencing him. "I assure you, Waraji, that I think little of your past with that worm Gato." The man assured the samurai. "Did I not recruit you for your skill? Have you not sworn your loyalty to me, Kido Genma?" Quote. Waraji nodded respectfully and reclaimed his place by the fire, shooting the amused drunks an annoyed glare. Abruptly, a figure appeared next to the man's tent, causing the attendants to startle. "Genma Dono," the apparition greeted, bowing his head low in respect. "I have finished my objective." "As have I," a large voice boomed, startling the attendants. As another figure appeared out of thin air. "Though the assignment was too easy for me, Shiroi Karasu," Genma greeted, eyeing the albino man carefully, before turning his gaze to the massive black man with no pupils, and Kuro Sasori. He raised a sake cup to his lips and took a sip. "Well, the village patrols can be easily dealt with," Karasu reported. "They change shifts at regular intervals, and there is a 30-minute window of opportunity between each change, more than enough time to silence the guards and storm the gates." "The local militia?" Genma asked, earning a snort from Kuro Sasori that caused him to look at the man. "They're all shit," the giant acknowledged. "I could take them all on with only 5 men to assist me." "You say that," one of the men muttered, reaching for a sake bottle. "But last I checked so did Benitora, and he's dead." Abruptly, the man toppled over, needles embedded into his eyes, tongue in most of his face and throat, causing him to gag and twist as the poison took effect. "Don't compare me to that weakling," Kuro Sasori yelled. "That big lummox, though that brute strength would be enough to block arrows, and look where that got him." He pointed at a head which sat on a pike. The sides were shaved to resemble a mohawk and several plates trailed down the back. The face had been decorated with tiger-stripe tattoos which would have appeared fearsome were it not for the fact the head's tongue was lolling out and that the eyes had rolled back in their sockets. Fool always did lose his head in battle. Genma noted dully, a fitting end for such a dull beast. Genma dono, Karasu asked, looking up at his master inquisitively, shall I give the order? Genma sat for a moment, as if thinking before reaching a conclusion and nodding. Kuro Sasori, he called out, catching the man's attention. Gather with you some of the men and take a little stroll. He smiled into his sake cup, see if you can't lighten the load for those boys guarding the walls. The massive black man grinned and held up his hands, needles held between his fingers. I'll raise the whole place to the ground. He promised, just watch me. Come on boys. Genma watched as the man departed, taking a party of men with him. Before raising his cup to his lips, you have something to say to me, Karasu? He asked, not looking at the albino man. It is not my place to question your methods. Karasu replied loyally, though I do wonder as to why you would permit this open attack. You know how bad Scorpion gets if I don't acknowledge him every now and again, Genma said dismissively, and besides, who better to instill terror into the hearts of men than the most bloodthirsty of beasts? I see, Karasu commented, you're testing the waters. Genma smiled and eyed the albino with respect. Ah Karasu, you always did understand me best. He nodded and took another sip of his sake. Indeed, when one is expecting booby traps, always send the boob in first. Oryu stared in awe at the bowl of ambrosia that guards had sat into his lap, the thrill of the divine food still echoing on his taste buds. Hey, you okay in there? One of the guards asked. I think something's up. He took one sip of that ramen and suddenly he's gone out and left the lights on. Another sniffed his own bowl suspiciously, before taking another cautious sip. Nope, tastes fine to me. He muttered, tucking into the meal contentedly. The captain walked over to the cell and eyed the catatonic blonde warily as he tapped on the bars. You okay in there? He called out, rapping the bars again for emphasis. Koryu blinked and came out of his daze, shaking his head to clear it as he stared at the bowl before him in awe. What is this? He wondered aloud, causing the captain to sweat drop. What, you never eaten ramen before? He asked, scratching his head as the blonde shook his own. Where you been living all this time? Under a rock? On a mountain actually, Koryu replied, and was officially recognized as the smartest man in the room for the next 10 minutes, amidst roars of laughter and toasts as the guards drank to his health. You know, one muttered, slurping up the remainder of his broth. I feel kinda bad, you sitting there quiet as a mouse and us caging you in like that. Think nothing of it, Koryu replied, lifting up another helping of noodles, you're merely doing your jobs. He nodded at the bowl of apparent ambrosia in his lap, and you did feed me. The guards didn't look too satisfied with this, but neither did they argue with it, turning back to their meal in silence. Just as one looked ready to suggest letting the blonde out, the alarm sounded, setting all hell loose. The hells, the captain yelled, what's going on out there? He looked out the window using a telescope and blanched, oh gods, the gatehouse is on fire. What's going on? Koryu called out, looking through the bars in confusion as the guards grabbed their weapons and made for the door. What's happening? A raid, a guard replied, pausing in the doorway to point at the blonde. Now sit there and be quiet. Koryu watched as the guards bailed out, before frowning and walking over to the bars. Gripping two in both hands and frowning. I sense a disgusting aura, he thought, turning high head towards the gatehouse. As his hands began to glow, the air is tainted with the scent of old blood. Oh my god, the guard captain breathed, looking round at the destroyed gatehouse, and by proxy, the massive hole in the village wall. Corpses lay where they had fallen. Some twisted into grotesque positions, others grinning manically, and some apparently reduced to piles of quivering flesh and blood. Smoke rose from one particular corpse, as it smoldered away the signal fire he'd managed to light before being killed. What happened here? One of the other guards whispered, only to flinch as a maniacal laugh deafened all in the area. I happened here. As one, the guards spun round to face the newest threat, only to shriek as multiple Senbon needles penetrated their bodies, causing them to fall over in various forms of death, amidst the cackles of Black Scorpion. As he seemed to appear out of nowhere. I am Kuro Sasori of the Three Colors Gang. The giant man ranted, holding needles between his knuckles. I have killed over 1,000 men with my skills. You answer nothing. Behind the insane assassin, several Tosei nin snickered as they watched the guards writhe in agony, one going so far as to stamp on the skull of one of the guards, smashing it like a ripe melon. Hey, Kuro Sasori-sama always wins. He bragged, makes me glad I decided to come. Tell me about it, another agreed, he always gets the job done, means we hardly need to do anything. Who is the greatest? Kuro Sasori yelled maniacally, to a rousing chorus of, you are. From his followers, naturally. The strong should live, the weak should die, and no one is stronger than me. Amidst the madman's rant, the guard captain coughed and climbed to his feet, having just missed a deadly senbon by a hair's breadth by ducking behind an upturned table. Checking to see if the coast was clear, he turned to run. Desperately praying he reached the village in time, only for a crossbow bolt to thrust through his leg joint, causing him to fall to the floor, screaming. Humph, on. E of the rats seems to be still running around. Kuro Sasori muttered, looking at the captain in the same manner one regards a cockroach, before holding up a senbon and letting it fly. Die you little shit. The poor man closed his eyes as he heard the deadly senbon hurtle through the air like a comet, praying at the very least that it would kill him instantly, only to blink as it abruptly stopped. Did he miss? He wondered, knowing it was ridiculous to even think it, before turning to look behind him, eyes widening in shock. What on? Koryu scowled at the stunned onlookers as he held the senbon in his gloved hands. The blonde's cowl had come off his head and his blue eyes glared at the Tosei nin with a steel-like intensity that could rival the finest katana. Well now, he muttered, snapping the senbon in half with his grip, not looking at the stunned guard captain as he spoke, looks like I'll be able to repay you for the meal after all. He glared at the men before him, discarding the remnants of the senbon needle and cracking his knuckles. Leave now, he ordered, changing hands and repeating the motion, unless you wish to die. Next time, Koryu faces off against Kuro Sasori in his first true fight to the death. Will the self-proclaimed strongest member of Genma's forces prevail against the 66th successor of the Hokuto Shinken Ryu? Koryu. Ome wa mo, Shindiru. R&R. Chapter 3. Why? The long-haired teen called out, why are you fighting so hard? Because you called me a failure. Naruto. Konoha Shinken Chapter 3, The Legend Begins. Koryu looked around at the number of corpses and frowned. What happened here? He asked the stunned guard captain, who was staring at him in shock. How'd you get out of the cell? The man asked, only to be ignored as the blonde took in the damage. Kozo. Black Scorpion called out, you seem to be pretty skilled to grab one of my senbon out of thin air like that. He grinned and lifted an arm, holding up more. Care for round 2. Kuro Sasori-sama, one of the samurai muttered, let us handle this, you need not lower yourself to handle trash like this. That said, the men charged forwards, swords swinging. In an attempt to cleave the blonde in two, Koryu merely frowned and shifted his stance, ducking around the blows and stepping nimbly out of reach, making it look like he was dancing around the men, when in actuality, he was dodging them by a hair's breadth, judging their skills. Damn, he's fast, the man from before muttered, only to whirl round and assure his master, worry not Kuro Sasori-sama. We will. Whatever the man was about to say was cut off as several senbon speared his face, sending him falling to the ground amidst his comrades in a spray of blood. Fools. Weaklings. Black Scorpion yelled, none of you were worth living. Koryu eyed the fallen men with shock, before turning a cool gaze toward the giant form of Kuro Sasori. They didn't deserve that, he muttered, eyeing the assassin coldly. They were following your orders. The man snorted, waving a hand dismissively. Bah. Following orders, you say? If so, then they failed. Did I not order them to kill all that opposed us? He looked to the remaining men behind him and grinned. Didn't I order such? A coward's attack. The tall man scowled and spun round, glaring at the blonde upstart in anger. Nandato. Sneaking in during the night. Ganging up on defenseless villagers was bad enough, Koryu muttered, but your own men. Unprovoked. From behind, he glared at the lanky man condemningly. A coward's attack. Kuro Sasori swelled up with anger and lunged forwards, hurling senbon at the blonde in anger, To his amazement, the blonde merely held up a palm, catching them between his fingers as if they were mosquitoes. Your technique may be able to kill those who are unprepared, Koryu stated calmly, looking the man right in the eyes, but my guard is up and will remain up. Kuro Sasori glared at the man, before smirking and tossing his senbon needles to the floor. A worthy opponent, the assassin yelled, finally someone worthy of facing my Ugi. Koryu frowned as the man held his arms at his sides, hands raised as he inhaled. A strange bulge forming at the throat. Eat this. The madman roared. Secret technique. Hidden justice. A hail of senbon launched themselves from the man's mouth, hurtling towards the blonde like hornets barreling out of their shattered nest. Koryu merely growled and crossed his arms in front of his face, protecting his throat and eyes from the deadly onslaught. Fool. Kuro Sasori mocked. Just one of the poisons that coats my senbon is enough to kill you. He cackled as he increased the amount of senbon. You've sealed your own fate. The barrage kept up for about a minute, before finally coming to a halt, Kuro Sasori turning around dismissively. You see men, he boasted, that is how you kill a man. Really? The madman froze, before slowly turning to follow the gazes of his shocked followers, gazing in disbelief at the figure standing before him. Do you always make assumptions based on appearances? Koryu muttered, lowering his arms, which were miraculously free of senbon. From his face, what if none of your blows connect? Impossible. Kuro Sasori yelled, backing up a step, and not one hit. I saw them hit you. Take a closer look, Koryu muttered, tossing one of the weapons at the man. Kuro Sasori caught the senbon an inch from his own eye, and stared in shock at the blunt end which hadn't been there before. My art enables me to harden my body until it is like steel. Koryu explained, such weak attacks mean nothing to me. He took a step towards the assassin, who was trembling with barely suppressed rage. You little brat, the once proud giant roared, lunging forwards with his fists holding more senbon than seemed physically possible, shiny. Koryu merely lunged forwards, getting under the surprised assassin's guo. Rode and thrusting a finger towards his forehead, stopping the man in his tracks. The two remained in that position for a few seconds, before Koryu stopped and turned his back on the man, walking towards the shocked guard captain. Oi! Kuro Sasori yelled, where do you think you're going, boy? He held up his hands and grinned, I still have to kill you. There is little point in fighting with you, Koryu muttered, coming to a stop in front of the captain, Ome wa mo, Shindiru. Kuro Sasori blinked, then began to laugh, a laugh that was picked up by his followers, until everyone was laughing. Shindiru. Where wa, Shindiru? He repeated, have you lost your mind, boy? Hardly, Koryu muttered, still not facing the man, your life will end, now. Kuro Sasori laughed and reared his hands back, ready to hurl the senbon at the boy, only to pause as something caused his head to twinge. What is? He wondered, before screaming as he felt his head bulge and distort, veins pulsing in his head as blood ran down his nose and out his ears. The men that accompanied him stepped back as he tried to stagger towards them, only to scream as the once proud assassin's head erupted in a geyser of blood, teeth, pulp, bone and gray matter. The shocked men looked from the twitching corpse of their leader to the impassive face of his killer and made for the hills, leaving their weapons where they fell. Koryu stared at the corpse in disgust, before turning his back on it and walking towards the stunned guard captain. Sorry I didn't get here sooner. He muttered, patting the man down for injuries. Noticing the arrow through the leg, we'd best get this seen to. He deduced, can you walk if I help you? The man nodded dumbly, allowing himself to be carried as they made their way, slowly back to the village. He killed one of the strongest assassins in the whole bleeding gang in seconds, he whispered, but let himself be taken in quietly. He shivered, looking up at his former prisoner in awe and terror. What is this guy? Single quote. Genma dono. One of the men cried out, bursting into the tent only to have the cold edge of a blade pressed to his throat. Let him in, Karasu, Genma stated calmly, if he were an assassin. I'm fairly certain he would come quietly. White Crow nodded, bowing his head respectfully towards his master as he lowered the weapon from the man's throat. Free of the threat of death, the man bowed to the ground and gave his report. Black Scorpion is dead. Genma wondered, sounding more interested than annoyed. Well now, it would appear your theories were correct, Karasu. White Crow nodded. No matter how powerful he may have been, a fool is still a fool. He muttered, he was unworthy of being a member of your forces. Yes, Genma muttered, even Ben. Atora managed to take his killers with him, and he was the stupidest of the three. He turned to the messenger and nodded, and the man that killed him, you say he used some strange martial art. The man nodded. All he did was poke Kuro Sasori-sama in the forehead, but it caused his head to explode. Genma quirked a delicate eyebrow upwards, before nodding to White Crow, who promptly vanished. Summon the men. He ordered the messenger, I think it's time we made our move. Inari frowned as he listened to the guard's report, sending more men to aid in reinforcing the breach in their defenses. If what he gathered was correct, then that man he'd met the other day must be either a mercenary or Nuke Nin on the run. Either way, in killing one of the bandits, he'd apparently drawn a line in the sand. A line which Inari wasn't sure the village would be able to protect. Speaking of which, the blonde had calmly sat to the side, staying out of the way, save to help with the carting of materials for the barricade. Which everyone knew wouldn't hold against a serious siege. Something on your mind? Inari looked up and blinked, as the blonde figure loomed over him, looking as expressionless as stone. The young man shook himself and scowled, looking up at the taller man suspiciously. Who are you? He asked. The only people with skills like yours are shinobi, but the only ones without any form of identification are Nuke Nin. My name is Koryu, the blonde replied calmly, not taking offense at the younger man's suspicions, just a drifter passing through. He frowned slightly and looked the mayor's grandson up and down. We met earlier, didn't we? Inari nodded, stubbornly looking the man in the eyes, wondering why those whiskers looked so damned familiar. You say you're just passing through? He asked, receiving a nod in reply. Any chance you can stick around to help out? Koryu took in the hectic mess that was the defenses and turned back to Inari with a nod. What do you need me to do? He asked, earning a snort from the younger man. For starters, Inari asked, how about helping with the barricades? He turned over some maps. We received a messenger bid from Konoha, saying that they're sending out some help. He winced, but even if they run full speed they won't be here for at least a day, noon tomorrow at least. Koryu frowned at the mention of Konoha, wondering if they might know something about the bizarre headband he was carrying, but shrugged it off as unimportant as he moved towards the barricades, helping to set things up. Noon heralded the arrival of the Tosei Nin, all of whom lined up in organized formation, jeering at the barricades and brandishing their weapons. The assorted guards manning the barricade merely eyed them stoically, armed with crossbows, rifles, and whatever else they could get their hands on. Some of them had lost friends that morning, others family, some just really hated everything their opponents stood for, all knew for certainty that they'd fight to the last man to keep the Tosei Nin from entering. They're well organized, Genma commented, standing at the rear with his hands on his sword. I must applaud them for that at least. Genma dono? White Crow asked, kneeling by the man's side, shall I make the first move? Karasu, Genma muttered, have you ever known me to wait on ceremony? The albino man bowed his head, no sir. Then what are you waiting for? Genma replied, smirking darkly, the order is given. Koryu sat in the lotus since, meditating as he waited for the call to arms. Word of his defeat of Black Scorpion had spread, and most of the people had given him a wide berth, either out of fear or respect. A few odd villagers would approach, if only to offer water or food, which were gratefully accepted, but most would merely stare at him like he was some prized gem on display. A few of the local children had started a game not 10 feet away from him, and he was keeping a wary lookout in case the Tosei Nin tried something underhanded. One of the children, the little black-haired girl from earlier, came up to him and tilted her head to the side, trying to look at his face. Koryu opened his eyes and regarded her with a calm expression. Hey mister, one of the other children called out, you must be pretty strong, huh? Koryu looked up to see the children had come up behind their friend and were eyeing him with the awe of youth. Can I help you? He asked, looking at them patiently. We heard you beat Kuro Sasori. One of the others called out with stars in his eyes, he's really strong. So you've got to be stronger. Kuro Sasori was only strong because he picked on the weak. Koryu countered, True strength comes from within. The children gazed in awe, the girl from before blushing slightly, causing him to look at her again. Your father is the mate of the Tsukihime, isn't he? He asked. What's your name? The girl flinched and looked away, earning a look of confusion from the man until one of the others tugged his cloak. Her name's Yu, sir, the boy replied, but she can't talk. Something happened when she was little. One of the others chipped in. She's been mute ever since. Koryu frowned, noting the look of discomfort on Yu's face as the others spoke on, before nodding and beckoning her to come closer. Placing his hands on either side of her head, he looked into her startled eyes and smiled reassuringly. This won't hurt a bit, he promised, before pressing 2 points on either side of her skull, sending a faint tingle throughout her body. Hey, what did you do to her? One of the boys asked, eyeing the man suspiciously as Yu felt her head carefully. You better not have done something to her. Just a little magic trick, Koryu assured the boy, noting the childish jealousy in his gaze. In time her voice will return to her. The children looked between Yu and Koryu in confusion, before looking at the man in awe. Magic. Cool, they yelled, and began clamoring for another display. Koryu, a voice called out, causing the blonde to look up into the mildly flushed face of Inari, the mayor's grandson. Something's going on at the barricade, come on. Koryu nodded, and with a last look at the stunned children, hurried off at the man's side, eyes settling into a cold, flint-like state. What the devil? Inari yelled, seeing the barricade burst and burning. The Tosei nin pouring through the hole in an almost orderly fashion. The bodies of the defenders lay where they had fallen, several sliced to ribbons, all looking absolutely shocked in death's embrace. Koryu scowled as the bandits stood apart, and 3 men stepped forwards. One was a samurai with scars, tattoos and an eye patch. The other wore a hat over his long gray hair and wore a baggy top. They stood on either side of a man with long black hair and a scar that ran diagonally down his face and under his kimono. Kido Genma, Inari muttered, hoisting his crossbow at the trio. Leader of the Tosei nin, used to be some hotshot samurai until his clan lost their power. Koryu nodded, eyeing the trio as they came to a halt, a good distance away from them. Ah, Inari, Genma greeted, waving a hand dismissively. Still as ruthless as I remember. I suppose I have you to thank for what happened to Benitora. Tiger hunting isn't my thing normally, Inari replied. I'm a fisherman at heart. But I'll be damned if I let you bastards take what's ours. Genma sighed and shook his head. Now really, is this any way to conduct business? He muttered, I woe. I'd think that washed-up old drunkard you call a grandfather would have at least taught you manners. Inari loosed a bolt from his crossbow at the man, only for it to be cut down by the guards before it even reached Genma, who smiled at him. A little touchy are we? The leader of the bandits called out, earning a round of sniggers from the men. Ah well, that is to be expected. You have one chance to leave with your lives. Koryu called out, looking over the laughing men calmly. I suggest you do so now. Genma eyed the blonde with a careful gaze, before nodding in understanding. You must be the one who killed Kuro Sasori. He noted, quite a feat from what I can say. He tilted his head. What say you? Care to switch sides? He held out a hand. Tell me your name. I value my name, Koryu replied, eyeing the man coldly. I don't give it to scum. Genma's face grew dark as he lowered his hand, the 2 swordsmen on his sides growling. I see, he muttered, before snapping his fingers. Kill him. Waraji and Zori lunged forwards, the taller of the 2 grinning maniacally as he charged towards his prey. The larger of the 2 samurai reached the man first, and moved to vivisect him, only for the man's heel to connect with the samurai's head. As he stumbled past, Zori attempted to cleave him from behind, only for the man's heel to swing round like a wrecking ball and send the shorter of the samurai sprawling to the side. The 2 straightened up, shaking their heads to clear them, before glaring at the man as he glared at Genma as if they weren't there. Don't screw with us, Waraji yelled, leaping forwards again, sword raised to slash down at the man's shoulder, only to freeze up as his head began to bulge and distort, Zori's following suit not long after. The last thing the taller samurai saw before his head exploded, was the whisker-like marks on the blonde's face. Masaka, he yelled, you're that. Koryu didn't even look away from Genma as the 2 samu Rai died in an explosion of blood and gray matter. He kept looking straight ahead at the leader of the bandits, who watched the death of his guards with mild disinterest. The same fate awaits any who attempt to pass me, Koryu muttered, eyeing the suddenly nervous bandits coldly. Leave. Genma eyed the corpses of Waraji and Zori and raised a delicate eyebrow, an interesting technique. He noted, as if commenting on the weather. You're obviously a practitioner of the martial arts. He shrugged lightly. Well, no loss, there are plenty of guards out there. Koryu scowled as he noted the calm in the man's eyes. Before eyeing the surroundings carefully, something seemed off. He kept getting the feeling something was flitting around him. Last chance to reconsider, Genma offered, noting the resolution in the blonde's eyes. No. Too bad. Koryu blinked as he sensed something apparate behind him. He caught a fleeting shock of white hair before something slashed his neck, not deep enough to prove dangerous, but enough to draw blood. You're fast. The figure called out, revealing a solemn-looking white crow, kneeling beside Genma respectfully, turning to avoid the blade even as I struck. He eyed the blonde warily. Before nodding, I am sorry for this, he offered, but it is my duty to kill you. The albino assassin held up a hand with a bladed tonfa, the light catching on the blade as he held it to his face. Kakugo. Quote. Next chapter. Koryu faces off against the legendary assassin White Crow. Will this master of high-speed assassination techniques take down the wilder of Hokuto Shinken? And will Genma simply sit back as his servant fights alone? Koryu. Ome wa mo, Shindiru. Chapter 4. Pain. That was all the girl could recall. She had fought so hard to prove herself, but no matter what. Her cousin had struck her down, even going so far as to cut off her chakra, stripping her of her ability to strike back. To top it all off, the same cousin had struck her heart with a blow that, most certainly, had been meant to kill. As her eyes shut from the pain, she dimly noted a head of golden, spiky hair gazing down at her, blue eyes wide with concern. Naruto. Kun. Naruto. Konoha Shinken Chapter 4. Pure Eyes. Hinata. Aburame Shino called out, snapping his female comrade out of her daze. Please stay alert, we have entered wave country. Hinata nodded, activating Byakugan to ensure they weren't being followed. The four-man cell known as Team Kurenai were en route to wave country, having been closest to the hotspot than any other team. They were to expect backup in the form of Team Guy later. But for now the reconnaissance team figured it would be best to scope out the situation and help out if possible. Man, Kiba whined, riding atop his childhood friend Pet Akamaru. We only just finished a mission a while ago, these damn bandit attacks are seriously pissing me off. According to the village's report, Kurenai noted, this is like no ordinary gathering of thugs. Seems as though some former samurai has been grouping them together to handle all the dirty work. Samurai, Kiba snorted mockingly, didn't those relics die out already? He shrugged, I mean come on. The only people that even use them nowadays are daimyos and lords. Precisely why those that go rogue are so dangerous. Shino replied, catching the group's attention, a wise man once compared samurai to sharks. They cannot stop moving, because to do so means death. He stared ahead, tree line rushing by overhead, it will not be easy to dissuade them. Koryu rubbed his fingers on the wound and eyed the blood, rubbing his fingers together as he eyed the pale-skinned man at Genma's side. And you are? He asked, eyeing the albino carefully. Shiroi Karasu. Genma introduced, my assassin, my friend. He nodded to the kneeling man, he will send you to hell. Koryu frowned and eyed the corpses of the village guards analytically. You killed the men here, didn't you? He asked, earning a nod from the albino. All of the men look like they were sliced by a light, swift weapon, and unlike the others, you have an obviously discernible aura. White Crow tilted his head slightly, a look of interest crossing his normally calm features. You notice much, he complimented, no one has been able to deduce this much from just observing. Those who cannot discern their opponent's skill deserve death. Koryu replied calmly, looking the man in the eyes, that is one of the teachings of my school. A very direct creed, White Crow noted, had we met under different circumstances. I would have liked to learn more. He hefted his weapon again and nodded, let us continue. Koryu nodded and moved into a fighting stance, hands positioned at waist and chest height, fingers pointed towards White Crow, his feet relatively close together. The stance was the standard stance of the Hokuto Shinken school, one that both invited the opponent to attack, and enabled the practitioner to respond in due course. The two eyed each other for about a minute, before White Crow blurred into motion, entering within striking range of Koryu's fists with uncanny speed. Koryu responded by shooting out a fist to strike the man on the shoulder, only for several slashes to rain up his arm. The blonde grunted and spun round to kick at the albino, only to receive the same results. Mutada, White Crow called out. My movements cannot be tracked so easily. He swerved in midair to take the rear. Prepare yourself. The albino assassin struck at the blonde's neck, only to leap back as a knife palm strike to the throat almost severed his windpipe. Koryu followed through with a high kick that forced the assassin to back away, blinking as the front of his kimono received a tear. Fast, Karasu deduced, landing back and watching as Koryu moved back into his stance, and strong as well, he seems in perfect alignment. He stood up, eyeing the man respectfully. I applaud you, he stated. Not many have been able to follow my movements, much less strike back at me. You are well trained, Koryu replied. Your movements are quick, and your reflexes are highly trained. You are a credit as an assassin. My thanks, Karasu replied. That said, I have every intention of winning this fight. He held out a hand, a single sakura petal held between two fingers. Please, prepare yourself. Koryu watched as the albino assassin blew on the petal, sending it out into the air. As he watched, the air became saturated with an aura of power, and the petal seemed to multiply, until a veritable blizzard surrounded him. My Ugi, Karasu's voice called out, seeming to echo from all directions, Aokamugan Kairo. Koryu frowned as the petals encircled him, cutting off all senses at once. All he could see was a wall of pink. All he could hear was the wind rustling the petals. Even the air was saturated with the scent of sakura blossoms. He flinched as another vision flashed before him. Wondering why on earth he'd recall a broad forehead framed by pink locks, before sighing gratefully as the bizarre apparition vanished. Something tells me that's one memory I could do without, he muttered, though I can't for the life of me tell why. He shook himself, before eyeing the blizzard warily. His presence is completely gone. Could this be the ninjutsu that sensei warned me about? What are you looking at? Karasu called out, his shadow appearing through the petals to the rear. Koryu struck out with a spin kick, slicing the shadow in two and revealing it as a cluster of petals. Hey, Kochida. He's replacing himself with afterimages. Koryu noted, having just punched through a log. Is this the infamous Kawarimi? His eyes widened as Karasu lunged towards him, having gotten under his guard. Awari-da, the albino stated, blurring into motion, appearing behind the blonde, a cross-shaped wound appearing on his chest. Hiya. Juji Retsu Yoku Zan, Koryu-san, Inari yelled out, as the blonde's blood sprayed through the air. Tem. He swore, pointing the crossbow at the albino assassin, you'll pay for that. He launched the bolt, only to be cut down before it even reached the assassin. Damn it, Inari swore, eyeing the laughing bandits angrily. If he had a guy this strong on his side, why'd he put off fighting for so long? Well, Genma noted, eyeing the kneeling blonde contemptuously. That was easier than I thought. Kuro Sasori must have been a bigger idiot than I thought. He smirked at Inari, ready to surrender. Inari-kun, Karasu, ignoring the conversation between the youth and his master, eyed the fallen halves of the bolt impassively, before turning his attention to his opponent. That was my Ugi, he relayed, eyeing the kneeling fighter carefully. What did you think of it? I can tell you avoided a fatal injury. Be assured that next time I'll aim for your heart. Koryu raised a hand to the wound on his chest, wiping some blood on his fingers. He raised the blood to his lips, tasting it, before spitting to the side. Go ahead, he stated, getting slowly to his feet. I allowed this fight to drag on, because I wished to experience your fighting style. Karasu blinked as the man got to his feet, the wound on his chest having apparently stopped bleeding. Impossible, he muttered. Either my eyes are playing tricks, or the wound is healing. I credit you on your skills, Koryu continued, as an assassin you are spectacular. He held up 3 fingers. However, there are 3 reasons you cannot defeat me. Karasu tilted his head. Oh really? He asked, looking a little amused. Care to back up those words? The first is conviction. Koryu stated, you battle because you believe you owe Genma a debt of servitude. This blinds you to your own path, and thus hinders your skills. Karasu flinched, a disgruntled look crossing his features as the blonde continued. Second, Koryu stated, while your speed is impressive, why? Our strength itself is nothing worth noting. He eyed the man's weapons carefully. Were it not for your weapons you'd have never landed a blow against me. Koryu then moved into his stance from before, his body leaving afterimages as he looked into the assassin's eyes. Thirdly, he stated, in over 2,000 years of history, there has existed no style that could defeat mine. He frowned, gesturing for Karasu to approach. Need proof? Then come at me with your ugi. Fool, Genma snorted, he survives Karasu's ugi and believes he's something special. He shook his head, I'll admit he's impressive. But Shiroi Karasu is a flawless assassin, this match is over. You're wrong, Inari stated, earning the older man's attention. I may not have known Koryu-san for long, but I can already tell there's more to him than what we see. He shivered as a hint of nostalgia ran through him. I don't know why, he admitted, but there's something about him that just lets me know he's going to win. Madness, Genma snorted. If you have time to daydream then you'd best set about gathering more men to guard the wall. He smirked at Inari's rage. Even if that fool wins, he doesn't stand a chance against my army. You shouldn't be so presumptuous. Karasu chided, before dashing forwards again, it will lead to your death. He swiped at Koryu, only for the man to dodge, as if flowing with the blow. Karasu kept up the assault, attempting to behead the man, only to find he'd backed off considerably. Dushta, the albino queried, show me your skills, or is dodging all your kempo is good for? I told you. Koryu replied calm as could be, despite the hectic dodging, come at me with your ugi like before, I want you at full strength. Karasu frowned for a moment, before sighing in resignation. As you wish. His eyes snapped open as the cherry blossoms filled the air, so it shall be. Ugi, Koryu heard as the scenery was once again replaced with a wall of swirling pink blossoms, Alkamugan Cairo. Dushta, Karasu called out, his voice echoing from all directions, are you stunned? Was all your words just a bluff? Koryu didn't reply, merely moving into a stance and closing his eyes. The sound of the swirling petals dying down to nothing. Slowly, the blonde exhaled, his senses sharpening slowly as he waited for Karasu to make the first move. There is no need to put up such a front. Karasu called out, when facing a skilled opponent, there is no dishonor in admitting you are outclassed. He lunged forwards, weapons at the ready as he made to take the man's back, Tatameta. Karasu's blades careened towards the blonde's neck, only to halt as his eyes widened, a flash of movement hurtling towards him. Bacana, he swore, as something smashed into his midriff. His ribcage snapping from the impact, his senses should be dead. The assassin launched backwards, his ugi dissipating as he slammed into the remains for the wall, coughing out blood. Koryu stood on one leg, hands on the ground. The other leg posed in a rear kick, having sent his opponent soaring. Hokuto, Koryu stated, eyes looking forwards calmly, like some immovable deity, Musou Insatsu. Climbing to his feet, the 66th successor to Hokuto Shinken turned to face his opponent, his stride calm and reserved. I told you, he stated, my fighting style is the strongest Ansatsuken. Intrinsically, it is the fighting style of assassins, no one is capable of sneaking up on me. Karasu coughed, looking up at the blonde feebly, reaching for his weapon. Mada, da. He panted, trying to stand up even as his ribs screamed in protest, I'm not finished. Enough, Koryu stated, I felt your ribs break when I kicked you. He pointed at the man authoritatively, I avoided your tenketsu on purpose. So you won't die as long as you get some proper medical treatment. Why? Karasu gasped, why didn't you finish me? He struggled to his feet, eyes ablaze, you pity your enemy. Your eyes are pure, Koryu replied, and unlike your master and colleague, you follow a code of honor. He nodded towards the village, I heard as much from the villagers. Villagers, Karasu coughed, earning a nod from his one-time opponent. An old woman who lives near a sakura tree in particular. Koryu replied, causing the albino's eyes to widen in recollection. Please. And old woman begged, standing before a sakura tree that grew near her house. This tree is all I have left of my family. Please don't cut it down. Out of the way, ya old besom. A thug yelled, savagely backhanding the woman. Kido-sama sent us to collect our debt, and if you can't pay with money, we'll take what's precious to ya. He raised an axe, only to flinch, then fall apart in a spray of blood, his fellow bandits looking around fearfully. Such trash, Karasu muttered, wiping his blade clean. To destroy a thing of beauty is abhorrent to me. Search around for valuables, leave the tree as it is. He bowed to the woman. I apologize for the actions of my men. Please do not fret, we will not be long. That was not the only occasion, Koryu added, looking into the amazed albino's eyes. Out of all the bandits, you were the only one who kept some semblance of morality and humanity. You kept bloodshed to a minimum, and avoided involving civilians if you could avoid it. The blonde nodded, looking down at the man as the sun shone behind him. You are an honorable warrior, Shiroi Karasu, he stated, holding out a hand. You do not deserve such a death, without having first experienced life. Karasu blinked, recalling how Genma had saved him all those years ago, tears of gratitude actually forming in his eyes as he reached a hand out to his former opponent. Suddenly his eyes widened, and with a cry of, Abanai, he lunged forwards, shoving Koryu out of the way, taking the crossbow bolt meant for the blonde in the stomach. Karasu, Koryu yelled, spinning round to glare death at Genma, who stood behind several archers, armed with crossbows. You were useless, Karasu. The former samurai muttered, all you managed to do was scratch his belly. Karasu gasped, pulling out the bolt and wincing, collapsing to his knees from the pain. Genma, Dono. He gasped, after all I've done for you, you betray me, like this. Betray, Genma muttered, is it betrayal when the master throttles the bird that can no longer fly? He snorted, your ugi was crushed, Karasu, I have no need for a bird that had lost its wings. He nodded to the archers, kill them. So this is how it ends. Karasu sighed, closing his eyes as he readied himself for death, the sound of launching arrows firming his resolve. Koryu Dono, I was honored to have fought you. He blinked as he sensed a presence before him. Staring in disbelief as Koryu leapt before him, hands outstretched. Koryu Dono, he called out, move. There is no need for you to die. Ha! Koryu yelled, his hands blurring into motion, suddenly grasping all 6 arrows between the gaps in his fingers. Hokuto, he called out, hand spinning quickly, Hashi Shinku ha. The archers screamed as their arrows were sent flying back at them, striking them in the eyes, throat and mouths respectively. The other bandits stared at their fallen comrades in horrified disbelief, some actually backing off or making for the hills with cries of, monster. Genma, either from disbelief, fear, or some combination of the two, stared down at the corpses in shock, before looking into the enraged eyes of the blonde, shivering at the death that stared back at him. Who are you? The former retainer snarled, knuckles whitening as they tightened around the sheath of his katana. Who in the hell are you? Your death, Koryu replied calmly, a deadly calm that reminded all of a sea just prior to a hurricane tore through. We're getting close, Kiba called out. Akamaru senses bloodshed up ahead, looks like the village is under attack. Kurenai frowned, sending a silent nod to her teammates. Team Guy had caught up to them a while back, the energetic, bushy-browed Junin having insisted they run full speed until they reached Wave. Naturally, Tenten and Neji had been dragged along in their teammates' youthful idiocy, the former shaking her head exasperatedly, and the later hiding behind the Hyuga mask of indifference. Yosh, Guy yelled, we should pick up the pace Kurenai, or we could arrive too late. Kurenai nodded, and signaled for her team to speed up, falling into line with Kiba in the lead, Kurenai behind him, Hinata between Lee and Guy. With Tenten and Neji bringing up the rear, the older Hyuga taking the weight off his cousin's back by taking up her role of scout with his Byakugan. My death, Genma repeated, chuckling darkly. You certainly like to talk, don't you? He drew his sword, smirking at the man the entire time. Do not mistake me for that weak little crow, I guarantee I won't go down that easy. Koryu didn't reply, merely stepping forward, face solemn. Behind him, White Crow could only look on as the two opponents drew near. He moved to get to his feet, only for the arrow wound to bring him to his knees again. Easy there, Inari muttered, putting a hand on the wounded albino's shoulder. You've got a damn hole in your stomach, take it easy. The albino stared in shock as his former enemy moved to bandage his wounds. A look of confusion on his weary features. Why? He asked, earning a snort from Inari. Koryu-san seems to see some good in you. Inari noted, besides, that old woman still wants to thank you. Karasu's eyes widened, before turning to look back at the two opponents. Well, Genma called out, nodding towards his opponent, aren't you going to move into a stance? I only do so when facing a strong opponent, Koryu replied, quite frankly you aren't worth the effort. He glared at the man, eyes taking on a metallic tint, the only thing I will show you, is the path to hell. Genma scowled, before smirking, eyes shut as Nei snorted, such confidence. He praised mockingly, you think mere martial arts can defeat me? His eyes snapped open, letting out a guttural growl that developed into a yell. His muscles expanded, rib cage expanding outwards as he apparently grew about a foot, so much so that his katana almost resembled a wakizashi. Behold, Genma called out, thanks to my Ankoku 2 Kako Jutsu, my strength in multiplied tenfold. He grinned as his men backed off, having never seen him this angry before. You think your martial arts can defeat me now? Be at ease. Despite your insolence I shall ensure you don't suffer. Koryu raised an eyebrow, taking in the change in appearance before frowning, as I thought, you truly are weak. Nani? Genma growled, looking insulted. Care to repeat that? He stated, holding the katana up threateningly. No matter how much it is multiplied, Koryu stated, clenching his fists, nothing will always remain as nothing. He glared at the man, noting the increase in muscle mass contemptuously. You think bulking up your muscles with Kai will enable you to defeat me? He inhaled, before letting out a low growl, which developed into a yell as his muscles expanded, his shirt stretching past its limits before being ripped to shreds as his ribcage expanded outwards. Genma stared at the teen in shock, as the destroyed garment fluttered around like fallen leaves, the whirlpool scar over the blonde's heart causing him to take a step back, veins bulging as he sensed the fear in his heart. You, the former samurai growled, before lunging forward sword at the ready. Who do you think I am? Ha! Koryu yelled, smacking the blade out of the way before stepping towards Genma, looking right into the madman's eyes as his hands seemingly multiplied as they struck out at insane speeds. Hawacha. Genma fell over backwards, his sword landing at his side as Koryu turned on his heel, turning his back to the long-haired man. The samurai felt himself in confusion, before breaking into mocking laughter. All that and you couldn't even make a scratch. He crowed, climbing to his feet. I told you. In this form I am unstoppable. He raised his sword above his head. Now turn around and face me. No, Koryu countered, not even deigning to look at the man. There is no point if fighting. Omae wa mo, Shindiru. Ma snarled and went to bring the sword down on Koryu's head, only to flinch, a sudden spasm shooting through his body. Nani rrgh. He managed to croak out, as his body twisted, bulged and contorted grotesquely. Hokuto. Koryu called out calmly, as Genma exploded in a fountain of blood, guts and gore. Hyakuretsu Ken. He walked towards the wall, as the remaining bandits turned tail and ran, tossing aside their weapons as they made for the hills, screaming for mercy. Such power. Karasu wondered, staring in awe at Koryu as he walked towards him. He defeated Genma as if he were no more than an ant. Yet faced me as if we were equal. This guy. Inari wondered, staring into the face of the blonde in wonder. How can any man have that much power? Koryu stopped before them, kneeling down to assess Karasu's wounds. You should be fine, he noted. Inari-san, are there any healers in the village? Hi. Inari noted, we may not have medic nins like the shinobi do, but we're no slouches in the medical field. This village is the trading epicenter of the Shinobi Islands. Karasu added, coughing weakly. It has access to all the latest items of trade, from medicine to silks, which is why our gang targeted it. Save your breath, Koryu ordered, supporting the injured assassin as he helped him to his feet. Inari-san, help me carry him back. Inari complied, smirking all the while as he did so. Man, he muttered. I dunno why, but for some reason I feel like some promise has been kept. He admitted, earning a look from the blonde. Years ago, I made a promise with this guy from Konoha. He said he'd come back if we ever needed a hand. He snorted, shaking his head in amusement. You kinda remind me of him. Koryu frowned, an image of a blubbering little boy in a hat entering his memory. Blinking as something ran down his cheek. Koryu dono. Karasu wondered, causing the man to look at him. Why are you crying? Koryu blinked, feeling his face with his free hand, staring at the tears in shock. What is this? He wondered. Why am I crying? He shook himself, before turning his attention towards the mob coming towards them. It's nothing. And there you have it, another chapter. Will Koryu stick around to meet the team from Konoha? Or will he disappear before they arrive? What of White Crow? What fate awaits for the only survivor of the Three Colors gang? Koryu. Omae wa mo, Shindiru. Notes. Kempo. Martial arts. Hokuto. Ursa Major, otherwise known as the North Star. Muso Insatsu. Nil Thought Shadow Kill. Not only limited to kicks, it's the ability to attack your opponent without knowing where they're at. For example, if they attack from behind or your blind spots, and you instinctively strike out and nail them. Hokuto Hyakuretsu Ken. North Star. 100 Crack Fist. If you don't know this, stop reading this FIC right now. Chapter 5. I'm going. Pain, confusion, betrayal, all emotions that swam through the mind of the blonde youth as he gazed into the twisted features of the boy he'd considered more than a friend, a brother in spirit if not by blood. And if you try to stop me, the other stated, gripping the blonde's wrist with strength not his own. The joint cracking fiercely, I'll kill you. Pain, thrown through the air courtesy of a punch to the stomach, falling into the water below, only to rise spluttering to the surface. Everything that we've been through. The blonde ground out through clenched teeth, all of that means nothing to you. Silence was his only response, before the raven-haired youth spoke, eyes shut. It wasn't worthless, he admitted. You've become. The teen's eyes opened, red with twin tomo circling the pupil. My closest friend, Naruto. Konoha Shinken Chapter 5, Parting Waves. Are you sure we can't convince you to stay? Inari asked, bandaged up as he stood before the village gates, eyeing the cloaked form before him. You'd be more than welcome. I cannot stay too long in one place, Koryu replied, face neutral as he regarded the young man before him. Besides, what your village needs now is craftsmen to rebuild, not warriors that only know how to destroy. Got that right, Inari winced, eyeing the damage to the wall painfully. Looks like we'll be needing those Konoha nin for guard work at least, though after what you did to Genma, I doubt any of his rats will dare set foot here again. It is best to be prepared, Koryu agreed. In future, it would be wise to ensure that you keep a tighter watch on your borders. About that, Inari recalled, Karasu left earlier, right after being treated actually. He shook his head, said something about being unable to accept aid from those he'd wronged, or something like that. The White Crow's path is a mysterious one, Koryu quoted, nodding his head towards the forest. However, crows always travel in groups. If I see him I doubt there'll be trouble. With that, the two shook hands, Inari grinning at the man, wondering why the stranger put him so much at ease. Behind them, the townsfolk had gathered to see the stranger off, the mayor, Tizuna, leaning on a cane as his daughter supported him. Are you sure you should be out here, father? Tsunami asked, as her elderly father began to cough. Maybe we should head back. Bah, the old man barked gently. I lived through an assassination attempt from Gato's thugs. A little fresh air won't kill me. He eyed the broad back of his grown grandson and smiled. Besides, if I'm to set an example for Inari, I can't miss seeing off the man who helped save us. He winced, trying to focus on the man's features. Despite the sun, just wish my eyes were what they used to be. I'd best be off, Koryu stated, grasping Inari's hand one last time, before turning on his heel and walking off. Only to blink as a shrill cry called out to him. Koryu-san. The man turned, gazing at the small figure that was standing apart from the crowd, gasping for breath, as if she'd run the whole way. Why Yu-chan? Inari wondered, eyes wide as he took in the gasping girl, the other children lining up beside her. She spoke. Koryu-nichan. The children called out, running up to the man and tugging at his cloak. Much to his surprise, you're not really leaving without saying goodbye, right? You just got here. You made Yu-chan talk. A boy added for emphasis, the girl blushing and hiding behind him. You're the coolest. And you're really strong too. You have to stay with us. Children. Inari called out, the group looking over at him in surprise. Koryu-san is on a mission to discover his past. He only helped us because it was the right thing to do. He looked at them seriously. Is it right to ask him to stay, when he still has answers to seek out? Demo. The boy began, tightening his fists as tears streamed down his cheeks, only to blink as a large hand ruffled his hair. Don't cry, Koryu said softly, kneeling down so that he was eye to eye with the group as a whole. All of you are the future of this village. Grow strong so that in future, you can protect it for the little ones that will follow you. He smiled and reached out, wiping the tears from their cheeks with a gentle finger. Leaving them gazing at him in awe. I will not scold you for crying, he assured them, smiling with his eyes closed, but the only time it is right for children to cry, is when they are happy. And with that he patted each child on the head, smiling one last time as he got to his feet, turning once again and making his way towards the forest, his sack over one shoulder as the wind rustled his cape. Inari gazed after the figure, stunned at the speech he'd given the children, the words echoing through him like shattering glass. Those words, he recalled, the image of a blonde teen, dressed in an outrageously bright orange jumpsuit, beaming down at him, hands clasped behind his head. Wait a minute, the whiskers, the eyes, he gasped as his memory kicked into gear. The faces of the two blondes superimposing as he noticed the similarities. Kami-sama. It couldn't be Naruto and Ikki, he called out, startling the crowds as he dashed forwards a few steps. Koryu having already disappeared into the woods. Naruto and Ikki. Naruto. A villager wondered, surprise on his face. You mean the same Naruto we named the bridge after? Can't be, an older villager countered. The kid was a shinobi of Konoha, that guy doesn't even have a headband. But Inari Dono seems so certain, another opined, eyeing the breathless young man carefully. He idolized the ninja with all his being. Just like he idolized Kaiza. Could it really be Naruto-kun? Tsunami wondered, blinking as she caught the faint chuckles her aged father was giving off, as he leant on his cane with both hands. The brat always was unpredictable. The aged architect muttered, shaking his weary head in amusement. Turbulent as a hurricane, gentle as a summer breeze, he was as predictable as the wind. Inari, he called out, snapping the frantic man out of his daze. Get a hold of yourself. Is that any way for a man to behave? He smiled at the look on his grandson's face. The wind blows in many directions. There is no doubt in my mind that he will return one day. You can come out, Koryu announced, pausing slightly in the middle of the path. Your ability to conceal your presence is commendable. But I already told you that my skills as an assassin negate them. My apologies, Karasu agreed, chuckling politely as he seemed to appear out of thin air, leaning against a tree. With an arm inside his kimono, I'm afraid it is a force of habit that insists I conceal myself. He eyed the taller man with respectful eyes. And where will you go now? I go in search of myself, Koryu revealed. There are many mysteries in my past that I need to uncover. He raised an eyebrow. And you? To tell the truth, Karasu admitted, I was wondering if you would allow me the honor of accompanying you. He bowed his head, slightly. I am indebted to you, not out of any assassin's code, but as one practitioner to another. You showed me that my skills were lacking and that I had yet still room to improve. You owe me no thanks. Koryu stated, looking the man in the eye. It was your own merits that spared you, just as Genma and Kuro Sasori's faults damned them. Nevertheless, Karasu countered, I am quite familiar with the elemental nations, perhaps I could act as a guide. Koryu was silent a moment, before nodding gratefully, accepting the former Tosei nin's hand in his own. I must admit, Karasu stated, eyeing his companion carefully as they walked along the path, your fighting style is quite efficient. I didn't catch the name however. All those who practice this style know it is Hokuto Shinken. Koryu stated, not looking away from the path. It is an ancient martial art passed down from father to a single heir, in order to ensure the peace of the world. Quite a noble creed, Karasu opined, raising an eyebrow, but how does one man take on the sins of the world? It is a dangerous path, Koryu admitted, and many people have died as a result of coming in contact with the style. Either through rite of combat or in failure to be selected as the successor. He blinked as something blurred overhead, sharp eyes catching sight of several odd figures and a large canine leaping through the trees, their destination the village behind them. Looks like the Konoha entourage arrived, Karasu opined, nodding at the canopy with a grim smile. A shame, IALW. AYS wondered how my art would fare against Konoha shinobi. Pride in one's art is permissible, Koryu stated, but too much pride leads to a lack of development, and the art eventually becomes stale. Karasu chuckled weakly, eyeing his companion with a wry smile. You really are a serious one, aren't you? Yosha, Guy yelled, landing in a victory pose as he grinned at the men along the ruined wall of the village. Fear not, good citizens, your protectors have arrived. A tumbleweed rolled past, as the workman gaped at the bushy-browed, bowl-cut sporting man like he'd sprouted another head, before shrugging and going back to work. The Konoha team's sweat dropped, Guy seeming to lose his enthusiasm, as they eyed the group carefully. Did we miss something? Hiba wondered, sniffing around. It smells like there was a battle. Where's the enemy? Dead and gone. A worker called out. They were driven off while we were still waiting for you. Yeah, what took you so long? Another opined, man, for the price we paid we expected you here a lot faster. You're saying that the enemy already left? Kurenai asked, noticing that some of the men looked injured. Did you fend them off? Yourselves. Nah, Koryu-san did it. A worker called out, bit of luck on our part, him showing up when he did. Koryu, Guy wondered, looking around the worksite in confusion, is he a resident of this village? We wish. A worker called out, looking excited, if we had a guy like that living here, no one would ever bother us again. Yeah, another agreed, they way he took down the entire group like that. He made some exaggerated martial arts moves, including noises, didn't even use a weapon. Wait, Tenten called out, signing for a timeout. You're saying that one man, without any jutsu or weapons, drove off an entire army of bandits with simple taijutsu? I wouldn't call what he used simple. An older worker replied, leaning on his shovel as he eyed the shinobi. Man made it look like an art form. The way he defeated them all without raising a sweat. Either way, Shino opined, there's little need for us here. He nodded to Kurenai for emphasis, since our team was the original support. We should stay behind and help set things right. I agree, Kurenai opined, turning to Team Guy apologetically. I'm sorry, Guy, making you rush out like. She trailed off as she realized that Guy wasn't listening. The man was trembling as he clenched his fists, a look of excitement on his face, before punching both fists into the air. Yosha, so another true master of taijutsu saw fit to aid those around him, and he did so single-handed. He turned to his protege, Lee. My flames of youth are reborn. I shall not be outdone by this Koryu person. Me too, sensei. The Guy clone agreed, eyes ablaze, and if I fail, I shall run back to Konoha on my hands with Neji on my back. Leave me out of this. The elder Hyuga yelled, whilst their female teammate giggled at how, despite everything that happened over the years, her team was still as wacky as ever. Are you the help we sent for from Konoha? A voice called out, the two teams turning to address a young man with a crossbow over his shoulder. I'm Inari, the mayor's grandson. Could you come with me please? So sorry for all the trouble, Tazuna chuckled, as he eyed the Konoha entourage warmly from behind his desk. We led you all the way out here for nothing. Not a problem, sir. Kurenai replied respectfully. If anything, we're just glad you're all alright. As are we, the mayor joked, eyeing the assembled shinobi carefully. Quite a difference from the last group I laid eyes on. How's that Kakashi fellow doing? You've met Kakashi? Kurenai asked, the surprise on her face mirrored on the other Konoha nin. Him and his 3 students. Chizuna replied, nodding toward a picture on his desk, which showed him, his wife, a child with a passing resemblance to Inari and 4 figures with Konoha Hitai 8. EY passed by here around the same time my bridge was nearing completion. It was supposed to be a C rank mission, but since I had people trying to kill me I hear it was raised to an A rank. Hinata Flynn, shed as she took in the grinning features of a certain blonde in the picture, Shino and Kiba patting her shoulder reassuringly, as Neji sent her a sentimental look out the corner of his eye. So how are they all? Chizuna asked, resting his chin on the back of his hands, Gendo Akari style. Bet they're all Junin and whatnot, Actually, Kurenai winced, the only members of Team 7 that rem. Ain are Hitaki Kakashi and Haruno Sakura. She winced as she felt the distress in Hinata's chakra, even as she noticed the shock on the Chizuna family's faces. What do you mean? Inari asked, looking distressed. Did something happen after they left? This isn't really our right to say, Kurenai admitted. However, shortly after the positioning of Tsunade-sama as Godime, Uchiha Sasuke betrayed K. Anaha in order to gain power from the late leader of Otogakure. Since most of the Junin and Chunin were away on missions, Guy continued, looking grim, Tsunade-sama appointed sent out a retrieval team composed of Sasuke-kun's classmates, one of whom was Naruto-kun, and 3 of which are here right now. You mean 4, Kiba muttered, nodding towards Akamaru, the giant hound barking in agreement with his master. We encountered interference in the form of 5 shinobi from Otogakure, Neji continued, the elite guard of the leader, who forced us to split up at intervals to fight one-on-one. Even with the aid of our allies from Sunagakure, Lee added, we all came out of that fight badly battered, some of us almost died. What about Naruto Aniki? Inari asked, looking at the group in desperation. He was with you, right? Quote, he was, Kiba admitted, looking at the ground, even as Akamaru's ears flattened, the hound whining sadly. He fought the traitor one-on-one at the Valley of the End. At least that's what it looked like. What do you mean? Chizuna asked, pressing a hand to stay his daughter as she tried to step forward. When Kakashi got there, the fight had already ended. Kurenai replied, Sasuke-kun was nowhere to be found, though echoes of his and Naruto's presence still hung in the air. She looked at the ground, however, there was a smell of blood as well. Kakashi's Ninken confirmed it as Naruto's. Tsunami clasped her hands to her mouth as Inari grit his teeth, fists clenched as he lowered his head. We searched high and low, but it's been 10 years now. Kurenai stated, shaking her head sadly. Uzumaki Naruto was officially declared Kia. Bullshit. Everyone stared in shock at Inari, as the young man slammed a fist into the wall, seething slightly as his fist trembled in the dent. He can't be dead, the man stated loudly. Aniki's tougher than anything. He took on that Zabuza bastard's protege and Gato's bodyguards all by himself. Zabuza. Guy repeated, you mean Momochi Zabuza. Kakashi mentioned that he encountered him a while ago. Hold up. Kurenai muttered, you're saying that the ninja Kakashi and his team protected you from was the Kurigakure no Kijin. And a bunch of samurai thugs hired by the late Gato. Chizuna added, smirking at the looks of shock on their faces, what, you thought I named the bridge after a ramen topping? That boy saved the entire country. And gave hope back to this old man. Wait a minute. Kiba stammered, pointing out the window, where the bridge could be seen in the distance. You're telling me that bridge is named after our Naruto? Who'd have thought it? Tenten wondered, looking impressed as she put a hand on her hip. Guess he wasn't bragging all the time after. All that aside, Neji cut in, looking less impressed than he was. What exactly do you mean he can't be dead? Why else would he not return home? You've no doubt heard by now about the man who drove off the Tosei Nin single-handedly, correct? Chizuna asked. He was in his early to mid-20s, with blonde hair that shone in the sun, blue eyes that matched the sky. He paused for effect, and 6 whisker-shaped marks adorning his cheeks. Everyone spasmed at this, the distinctive imagery sounding all too familiar, Hinata actually clasping a hand to her mouth in a mixture of disbelief and hope. Now don't get me wrong, Chizuna stated. The last time I saw Naruto he was a short little bastard barely over my waist. This fellow was over 6 feet and the marks on his face could very easily be scars. He shrugged, and as for the hair and eyes, well, there's hardly a shortage of blue-eyed blondes, is there? Especially in your neck of the woods. That's true. Kurenai admitted, pulling out a sheet of paper. However, I think we'll look into this Koryu fellow all the same. Can you give us a better description? Not really, Inari offered. Over 6 feet, blonde, blue eyes, whisker marks. He noticed the female Hyuga FLINCH at this but kept silent. Dressed in traveling clothes and a cloak. He blinked and nodded. Oh yeah, he also had a scar in the shape of a whirlpool over his heart. A whirlpool-shaped scar, Kurenai asked, wincing at the thought. There aren't many things that can cause a wound like that. Sounds like the flesh was torn and burnt at the same time. Thanks for everything, she offered, handing her notes to Guy. My team and I will stay behind until the damage is repaired, in case any stragglers try anything. We appreciate that, Tazuna assured her, and again, my apologies for dragging you all the way out here. As Team Guy left the office, Neji shot one last look at his cousin as she and her team remained behind. Hinata had been devastated when Naruto had been announced Kia, hell, half the damn village had been stunned. The boy had been a staple of the village for years, even if they refused to acknowledge it. A single day without his boisterous presence made it quite clear that Uzumaki Naruto had been the unnoticed ray of sunshine in the lives of many people. Since that day, Hinata had thrown herself into her training, trying to block out all other things in order to keep her promise to become stronger. She had long ago surpassed her sister, Hanabi, cementing her place as clan heir in the eyes of her father. She had also garnered much support of the Branch family with her kind words and gentle demeanor. And her dream to abolish the cage bird seal had only strengthened their conviction to follow her unto death. Now here, faced with the chance of discovering the blonde's whereabouts, Negi had seen something in his cousin that had been dead for years, something that had been shut away by the loss of Konoha's most unpredictable shinobi and self-proclaimed Rokudaime Hokage. And he'd be damned if he let that fade away without a fight. Neji, Tenten queried, snapping the Hyuga out of his thoughts. Daijobu. You look a little preoccupied there. Just thinking, Neji muttered. We passed by 2 figures walking down the path away from the village right. He waited for the girl to nod. Do you think they may know something of this Koryu person? Maybe, Tenten allotted, holding her chin. Before looking at him in confusion, you really think it could be him? I honestly couldn't say, Neji replied, frowning thoughtfully. On the one hand, it would be ridiculous to think he just fell off the map for 10 years. On the other, Tenten continued with a smile, it would be exactly like him to do something like that. Neji merely snorted, though a small, almost imperceptible smirk crossed his features, the image of a grinning Naruto hovering briefly at the back of his thoughts. So there are 5 major shinobi powers. Koryu repeated, the 2 having each to ride with a trade caravan heading for Kusagaku, and these 5 are headed by people known as Kage. Indeed, Karasu stated, Konohagakure is led by the Godaime Hokage, Tsunade-sama of the Densetsu no Sanin. He held up a finger. Their ally, Sunagaku, is led by the infamous Sabaku no Gara, who claimed the Kazekage title in his teens. He held up a finger. The Yondaime Mizukage a secretive bastard who never appears in public, and the same could be said for the Tsuchikage and Reikage, though I hear the current Tsuchikage is content to operate within his own nation and not start any wars. A wise notion in this time of conflict. One of the other passengers muttered, I heard that Kumogakure was assaulted a few years ago, apparently their secret weapon was stolen by 2 missing nin. Secret weapon, Koryu repeated, eyeing the man carefully, some new advancement in artillery perhaps. Nah, something much worse. The man snorted, ever hear of the Jinchuriki? Koryu flinched, a feeling akin to ice sliding down his spine and into his gut as the word seemed to echo in his skull. He had no memory of such a word, and yet something about it told him that it was something very important to him. But not in any pleasant way. Well, the traveler continued, not long after Suna reclaimed their Kazekage, Kumogakure's forces were cut in half by just 2 missing nin. Searching for the Nibi no Jinchuriki according to the rumor. What is this Jinchuriki you speak of? Karasu asked, eyeing Koryu carefully, noticing how the man seemed to be having a bad flashback. A human sacrifice, the traveler replied, the type used to seal away the Biju in order to control their legendary power. He snorted, the Reikage made it public knowledge that the Nibi Jinchuriki was his personal bodyguard. Guess he should have kept that little tidbit to himself. Karasu said nothing, merely turning to face his companion, who was looking visibly shaken and panting heavily as he held his hand to his forehead. "Are you all right, Koryu Dono?" he asked. "Fine," Koryu offered, shaking himself and wiping the sweat from his brow, gazing out the end of the caravan at the scenery, his face a mask of neutrality. "Just fine. Will Team Guy discover the whereabouts of the errant Koryu? What are these new developments within the shinobi Nadens? Will Guy and Lee succeed in challenging the newest successor of the world's deadliest fist, Koryu? Omae wa mo, Shindiru. R&R. Chapter 6. Sorry this took so long, but it's hard to write a FIC after being away from it for so long. That said, splicing 70s manga goodness that is HNK with modern manga that is Naruto is a tedious job, that, in my opinion, is well worth the effort. That said, on with Koryu's journey of self-discovery. Naruto. Konoha Shinken Chapter 6. Snakes in the Grass. Kusagaker had long been noted for its vast, endless fields of grass, the public road carefully paved off to avoid the various shinobi roots and traps that had been hidden in the greenery. Its prime exports appeared to be dyes, herbs, vegetables and silk. Koryu barely noted the charm of the village, whilst indeed a fine example of architecture. The place just didn't seem to click. Though he had to admit, the silk was indeed impressive. They produce it from the thread of silk worms that feed on plants fertilized with chakra. Karasu explained helpfully, examining a roll of the fabric alongside the successor. No other country comes close to providing such a light, strong, durable material. All the daimyo wear robes fashioned from these. He smiled guiltily. I myself am rather smitten with them. With good reason. Koryu noted calmly, returning the silk with a bow. I have never seen such quality. This would make a fine gift for the master. You wish to have a robe made for someone? The tailor asked, smiling up at the blonde helpfully as she finished taking measurements for a villager's dress. Do you have the measurements? My master is at least 1.5 feet taller than myself. Koryu revealed, Karasu gazing at his 6'5" companion in shock. That, and his body mass is considerably wider. For comparison, I'd compare it to that oxen. The woman gaped as she followed the man's gaze to one of the grass daimyo's oxen, a massive brute of a beast that could have taken on a tank and won. I've never done a job that big, she admitted. Before rolling up her sleeves, but I'll give it a shot. Koryu Dono? Karasu asked nervously, watching the woman as she took measurements of the bemused beast. How do you intend to pay for this gift? The cost of the silk alone. Rest assured, I can procure the means to pay the bill with ease. Koryu assured the man, lifting up several money pouches, from the corpses of the slain guards and Genma. They won't be needing them in hell. Karasu blinked, eyeing Genma's pouch in amazement, before chuckling in disbelief. You truly are an assassin. He noted grimly, functional, effective, merciless. Had I met you sooner I doubt I'd have lived to meet Genma. Koryu said nothing as he paid a deposit for the robes, promising to come back in a few days' time as they exited the store. Walking along the main street. Perhaps you would consider getting lunch? Karasu asked, keeping pace with the taller man effortlessly. We have not eaten since yesterday, and it is already noon. He nodded towards a restaurant nearby. I understand the yakiniku in Kusa is also the finest in the nations. Koryu merely nodded his affirmation, entrusting his guide's opinion firmly as they entered the establishment. I see, Tsunade noted, regarding the recently returned team guy with a careful expression as she read their report, and you're certain of this information? We checked around the village before leaving. Guy reported seriously, standing at attention. The villagers all agree with the description, 6'5", blonde hair, blue eyes and well-built. Only 2 people witnessed the fight, Neji added solemnly. Standing at attention before the Hokage. 1 left before we arrived, and the other was the mayor's son, who identified the whirlpool scar over the heart. Sounds Lee. The flesh was torn and cauterized at the same time. Tsunade noted, making the same observation Kurenai had, only with a more concealed wince. There's only one technique I know of that can cause wounds, but no one has ever survived being hit by it. Was there any sign of him on the road to Konoha? She asked, looking from face to face as they all shook their heads before sighing. Very well, rest up for now. I'll probably send for you soon, so stay at home and gather your strength." The team saluted, leaving the room ceremoniously, the godime slumping in her chair as soon as they left. Could it be him? She wondered, reaching for her sake jug with a trembling hand as she tried to calm herself. After all these years, after all the losses, could he be alive? She looked up at the picture of the fourth on the wall. The solemn features warping into a cheerful grin with whisker marks on the cheeks. Naruto. The yakiniku here is indeed most pleasant, Karasu noted as they devoured their meal calmly. True, there are other delicacies in this world, but each nation has its own. It's the herbs you see. So what are the specialties of the nations? Koryu asked, placing his pea sticks on the plate as he waited for more meat to fry, honestly a little impressed with the quality himself. Well, Wave doesn't really have a special since it's a trading hub, Karasu admitted at length, but Kurigakure, which is just a short day's run by ship, hosts the best seafood and the finest swords. He held up a finger. Kumogakure is famous for its sake, and the minerals found in the mountains are rich in valuable ores. Iwagakure is currently recovering from the last Great War, but is notable for their stance in the market for gems, coal and other valuable minerals. I believe the specialty there is udon. They thanked the waitress as she served them another tray of meat, watching as it cooked carefully. Sunagakure is, technically, the second greatest shinobi power at the moment. Karasu continued, however, the individual quality of each shinobi makes them a match for any three-man team. Most get promoted to chunin rather quickly. They provide the highest quality steel for weapons. And the specialties are spicy dishes cooked with desert herbs. He loaded his plate with a generous helping of meat. And finally, Konoha, the current dominant superpower. He elaborated with his chopsticks, specializes in wood, paper, general trade items such as foodstuffs, and seals. Seals, Koryu repeated, cocking an eyebrow in inquiry, as this sounded like an interesting subject. Fuin Jutsu, the art of seals. Karasu explained, a branch of ninjutsu that few take up, and even fewer excel at. They can be limited to storage seals, in which people may store weapons etc. in. Scrolls or other items. To seals that can suppress, limit the flow of chakra, preserve a severed limb, or even seal the biju into mortals. Koryu flinched imperceptibly at the word, biju, though for the life of him he couldn't explain why. He also noticed several other diners share a similar reaction, many making a sign against evil or sending a glare at Karasu for his carelessness, only to look away hurriedly when they met Koryu's flat, unrelenting stare. This is the second time I have heard that word. What are these, biju, you speak of? Karasu's eyes widened, only to relax as he shook his head, but of course. As a stranger in a strange land, you wouldn't have heard of them. The albino assassin noted, shaking his head with a sigh. I'd be jealous were it not foolish to venture in these lands without proper knowledge. Waving down a waitress, he ordered a kettle of green tea, Karasu pouring the soothing liquid himself before speaking. The biju are an oddity of sorts, giant masses of chakra that take the form of beasts with a varying number of tails, from weakest to strongest, 9 in all. Why do people fear them? Koryu asked, eyeing a group as they hurriedly left their booth, muttering something about bad omens. They have good reason to, Karasu assured him, for the biju are akin to forces of nature. They could tear through a country like a hurricane, leaving naught but death and destruction in their wake. He shuddered imperceptibly. I had the dubious honor of living through such an attack as a child, when the Yonbi tore through my mountain village. Koryu chose not to speak, instead waiting for the trembling assassin to compose himself. Apparently these biju were not something to cross, if the mere memory of an event so long ago could bring a man of Karasu's caliber to this. But that is a moot point these days, I hear. Karasu continued after a few tense moments of silence. Most of the biju were sealed into Jinchuriki. He paused at Koryu's barely noticeable flinch, but even more so. I heard an organization if hunting those said containers, as well as any free-roaming biju that remain, if any such exist. What would anyone want with such beasts? Koryu asked, a dark frowning building on his face for a reason he could not comprehend, correcting himself with a quick sip of calming tea. Nothing good, I can assure you that, Karasu muttered, looking around warily. Though it was merely an act of habit. After all, If anyone capable of sneaking up on 2 assassins was in this establishment, Koryu wouldn't have broached the subject. In any case, what do you intend to do now? For now, I am content to wait for the tailor to finish the gift for Shisho. Koryu assured his companion, setting his cup back on the able with a sigh. However, these Noa shinobi intrigue me. They may know something of my past. I would advise heading there for now. Karasu warned him. Konoha has been the stage for numerous battles recently. Rumor has it that aka Tsuki believes they're hiding the location of the Kyuubi no Jinchuriki. A lance of hot lightning shot through Koryu's brain, driving the man to his knees as he gasped for breath, knocking cups to the floor. Karasu, concerned for his companion, knelt beside him, eyes wide as he noted the sweat coursing down the blonde's cheeks. Such a strong reaction. The assassin marveled, part of him morbidly fascinated at the blonde's predicament. What could possibly have happened in Koryu Dono's past that the mere mention of the strongest Biju could bring him to his knees? Are you ill? A waitress asked, scuttling closer with her tray held before her mouth, as if to shield her from retaliation. No, Koryu assured her, catching his breath and regaining his footing, albeit shakily. I am fine, merely tired. He pulled out a pouch and handed it to Karasu. Pay for the tea and cups, I'll be waiting outside. As he left Karasu to pay, Koryu stumbled his way out of the tea house, using the walls to support himself. Not trusting his still trembling legs, even as he staggered down the street. What was that? He gasped, teeth clenched as the pain behind his eyeballs slowly dimmed, but did not vanish. Like an explosion of raw power. In my mind, he shuddered, warding off the feeling of wrongness that the power had filled him with. I mustn't let my guard down. He decided, whatever it was, I wished to have no part of it. Koryu Dono. Karasu's voice called out the 66th successor, turning to find his traveling companion standing at his elbow, face fraught with concern. I am fine, Karasu-san. He assured the albino, technically true, as the fresh air was helping his recovery. I merely needed to clear my head. Karasu didn't look like he bought it for 1 second, but let it slide in favor of directing his companion to a decently priced inn, where they were to spend the night. Neji ni sama, Hyuga Hanabi called out, startling the older Hyuga as she entered the dojo, as she'd been taught. As quiet as a mouse. You were here. Hanabi-sama, Neji acknowledged, pausing in his katas to acknowledge the youngest Hyuga sibling with a small bow. Did you need me for something? I merely heard you returned from your mission early. Hanabi assured him, shaking her head slightly, but I didn't see Hinata-ne-sama with you. Hinata-sama's team remains on duty in Nami no Kuni. Neji explained, doing small breathing exercises to loosen himself up. Since my team's services were no longer required, we returned to give our report. I see, Hanabi noted, looking a little disappointed at her sister's delayed return, before turning her attention to her cousin. Was there any fighting? No, Neji assured her. By the time we got there, the battle was over. The villagers had repelled the enemy with the aid of a wandering taijutsu specialist. Is that so? Another voice inquired, both teams snapping to attention as Hyuga Hiyashi, the head of the Hyuga clan and patriarch of the main branch, swept into the dojo. Most interesting, was there anything noteworthy about him? Sadly, we arrived well after the battle's conclusion. Neji informed the man, kneeling respectful. Why, despite Hiyashi's insistence, such actions were not required between them. Furthermore, the taijutsu user had already departed to parts unknown. I see, Hiyashi muttered, placing a hand to his chin. Still, there aren't many styles that enable a single man to defeat an army, even if they were merely wandering samurai and thugs. The elder's grandson and a few others were witness to the fighting. Neji continued, looking up at his uncle as he spoke. They claim that he struck them with blows that, at first, seemed negligible, only for their bodies to be destroyed internally. Hiyashi's face darkened in a contemplating frown, understanding all too well what that implied. Tenketsu, he muttered, causing Hanabi's eyes to widen. Well, that narrows things down a bit. There are barely a handful of styles on this continent that target Tenketsu, our own Juken among them. He looked to Neji, his eyes inquisitive. Did they mention anything else? His description, the name of his style. Neji frowned, trying to recall anything about the style as he listed off the man's description. Over 6 feet in height, muscled but lean, like an athlete, spiky blonde hair and blue eyes, with whisker marks on his cheeks. And a scar in the shape of a whirlpool over his heart. Hanabi's eyes widened at the mention of the whisker marks. Hiyashi's too, but you'd have to have been watching him to notice, and even then you'd have missed it. There wasn't a single Hyuga alive that didn't know the name of Uzumaki Naruto, the youth that had sworn to change the ways of the clan when he assumed the Hokage title. He may have been officially declared Kia by Konoha, but the Hyuga, particularly certain members of the main and branch families, had secretly never believed that to be true. The youth had not only inspired the heiress to step into her role and develop as a shinobi, not to mention knocking some much-needed sense into the prodigal Neji, but had actually inspired Hiyashi's youngest daughter to excel. The girl adopting an attitude eerily similar to her sister's. Hiyashi would never forget what the boy had done for him either. He'd given Hiyashi his family back, something he had thought lost since Hide Hazashi laid down his life for him. If there was the slightest chance in hell that Uzumaki Naruto was still alive, then Hiyashi would do everything in his power to prove it and bring him home. Anyone that dared to stand in the way would face the fully fury of the united Hyuga clan. Keep me posted on any updates. Hiyashi ordered, receiving a nod from Neji as he turned on his heel. Hanabi, come with me. He called out, not unkindly, we must continue your training. Hi, Otu-sama, Hanabi acknowledged, bowing one last time to her cousin before following after her father. Koryu sat by his window, chugging down a glass of cool water from the jug the maid had left there. His chest, bare from the shower save for the towel wrapped around his neck, shone in the dim light of the room. The shadows accentuating his scar as he eyed the moon, slowly making its way through the night sky. Another full moon, he noted, the sense of calm such nights brought on him washing over him as always, that familiar, yet unknown face swimming just outside of his recollection. Why do such nights bring me peace? Why do they seem so important? The moon, of course, could not answer the successor's questions. It could only provide comfort, what little it could, as its soothing light fell upon him. A truly wondrous night, Karasu noted, stepping into the room, dressed in a sleeping kimono tee. He innkeeper had thoughtfully provided. I didn't see you at the onsen. I prefer to bathe alone, Koryu assured him, though he couldn't honestly explain why he'd chosen to pass up the soak. Onsen were reputedly good for healing wounds, though the best seemed to be found in Konoha, as everything seemed to be. If you insist, Karasu opined neutrally, I certainly cannot fault you on it, being a fellow assassin. He stepped up to the window to watch the moon. The moon is full, back home we considered this an omen. Omen, Koryu repeated, looking up as his companion, handing him a mug of cool water, which the albino accepted gratefully. On nights such as these, it is said that spirits come out to play. Karasu noted, pointing at several glowing balls of light that seemed to dance in the air. Fireflies, Koryu noted, quirking an eyebrow as one landed on his finger, adding its soft glow to the dark room. An old tale to scare children, Karasu admitted with a small smile, something to tell on cold nights with nothing better to do. He frowned suddenly, though not without a mote of truth, for the Biju were always the most active on nights of the full moon. Koryu frowned, the fire lifting from his finger as it sensed his irritation, flying off amongst its brethren as he continued to gaze aloofly out the window. I will not ask what caused your attack earlier, Karasu informed him, his tone courteous to a fault. That is your own business, and I apologize for brining it up. He turned to the moon. However, these are dangerous times to walk in ignorance. There are mutterin' GS of another shinobi war on the horizon. Harsh tidings indeed, Koryu agreed, his tone calm, as he continued to gaze out the window. In the event it does break out, who stands to suffer the worst? The 5 great shinobi nations will most certainly be the ones drawing lines, Karasu informed him. However, there are an untold multitude of smaller villages that will be dragged into it, either because of border disputes, quest for fame, or even the simple desire to gain power and influence, with civilians getting caught in the crossfire. Koryu noted, a frown on his face. The more I hear of these shinobi, the lesser my opinion of them. Not all shinobi are without scruples. Karasu assured him. The 5 great shinobi nations operate much like small cities, they value their civilian populace as much as their shinobi ones. And usually ensure they former are kept out of harm's way. He frowned. Though some, like the former Otogaker, were not so accommodating. Koryu would have asked more, but at that moment, alarm bells filled the air, along with the town watch's cries for everyone to evacuate. A raid, the captain of the guard cursed, wiping soot out of his eyes from the flames. The other gripping a long spear in a death grip. Whoever these bastards were, they certainly knew how to make an entrance. Who are they? Remnants of Otogaker. A random guard called out, "Cove." Wring his bleeding brow with one hand. They blasted us with some sort of sound wave before making for the village stores. Damn it. The captain cursed, teeth bared in a snarl, just as most of our Junin are off on missions too. It wasn't that a few highly skilled Chunin-class shinobi couldn't ward off Otogaker's shinobi, the late Orochimaru had only truly trained those with talent after all, leaving the rank-and-file soldiers to their own devices. The problem was that the bastards attacked in swarms, like a pack of locusts, and without Orochimaru to lead them, the snake having apparently been killed off years ago by one of his disciples. They saw no reason to adhere to traditional shinobi ethics, and instead reverted to nothing more than bandits, albeit ones with Odo weapons and jutsu. Single quote. Not to mention the few that carry the Tenfuin. The captain muttered, tracing a scar that cut across his face diagonally, a memento from a fight with just such a monster. The snake might be gone, but his legacy still poisons the lands. Send word out to Konoha at once. He ordered, his spear jabbing upwards, eliciting a howl from an Odo nin that had thought himself concealed as he was skewered. Between the legs, they have the most experience with these bastards. And they're closest to us. The guard nodded, dashing off to the communications tower to send off a messenger bird, even as a surge of gray-clad assailants bore down on the rest of the guards. They've taken the east gate. One of them called out, his body covered in blood, though none of it his own. Taiko. There's a Tenfuin user amongst them. They're holed up at the academy. Goddammit. The captain roared, his spear cleaving another has been in half before he could bring his melody arm to bear. Just what we need. What happened to the East Gate guards? No need to concern yourself. A calm voice called out, sending shivers up the backs of the guards and their opponents alike. The East Gate is in good hands. Who? The captain muttered, only to gape as 10 Odo shinobi that were rushing him fell apart in a spray of blood, their comrades pausing in their attack. What the hell? One of the more crass invaders yelped, looking around warily, only to freeze, touching his neck, where a thin red line was beginning to appear. Please excuse my rude entrance. Karasu called out, even as the fool's head fell away from his body, which joined it on the floor, but I don't believe there is a need to wait on ceremony for trash. Who are you calling trash, bitch? An Odo Kunoichi swore, hurling Senbon at the man, NLY for them to be deflected with a simple wave of his weapons. You of course, Karasu muttered, his eyes brimming with cold annoyance that actually caused the Otonin to retreat a step out of shock. You attacked this village without warning nor due cause. As an assassin I could understand this, but all you're doing is looting these hard-working people in order to fill your bellies. What's it to you, huh? A random Otonin called out, only to shiver as Karasu's killing intent washed over him. It means you are nothing more than a pack of ravenous beasts. Karasu muttered coldly, raising his bladed tonfa in readiness, and shall be slaughtered as such. Yahahaha. A deranged voice cackled. The owner, a giant, bald-headed man, stripped to the waist, dressed in the remains of an Odogaker outfit, including the rope belt. Bring us all your sake and women, or I'll rip this kid's head off. You son of a bitch. A Chunin instructor snarled, gripping his ninjutsu tightly as he glared at the giant. One hand clutching a wound on his side. You call yourself a man, you coward? You talking to me? The giant sneered, stretching his hands apart slowly, causing the child held between them to cry out. The child's parents screaming for him to stop from behind the Chunin blocking the way. Better do as he says. A crass voice called out, the owner a man in his late 20s, dressed in an expensive, if faded kimono. The Odo rope belt around his waist. My friend here's a little short-tempered, and we have so many playmates for him to play with. Sensei. The terrified youngsters called out. Hanging suspended inside a giant metal cage, a soul, small gate the only way in or out, help us please. Aniki really knows his stuff huh? A random Oto nin chuckled, squatting nearby, crossbow well within reach should the locals try anything stupid. Ever since he joined up we've been breezing through these villages. Another cackled, sitting on the corpse of a downed Kusa instructor, chewing on a leg of meat. Oi, a third called out, rattling the metal staff as he did so, you sure you wanna keep us waiting any longer? Aniki said he wanted the best you got, and he wants it now. Sunuva, one of the instructors growled, only to blink as a tall figure in a traveler's cloak walked past him, his height and build marking him as a fighter. Hey. Wait a minute, can't you see they have hostages? If the blond man heard his warning he didn't show it, he merely advanced on the giant, who glared down at him beetily, the blubber on his face giving him the features of an overweight gorilla. You bring me my booze. The giant demanded, looking over the newcomer suspiciously. I don't see any booze on ya pipsqueak, you trying to make a fool out of me. He scowled as the man refused to answer. Hey, I'm talking to you. Quote, don't, the blonde muttered, waving a hand in front of his face, as if waving away smoke, your breath's rotten. The giant swelled, veins bulging all over his head as he clenched his teeth. Kasama. He growled, standing to his full height, holding the child tight between his hands. You makin' fun of me umprghle. The gathered crowd gaped in disbelief as the stranger punched the giant, striking him right under the ribs with a monkey paw fist, the mon's chest collapsing inwards like a pillow from the blow, causing him to drop the youth, who was swiftly swept up by the stranger before he could touch the ground. Go back to your parents. Koryu ordered the child, setting him down and pushing him in the direction of the gathered villagers, two of which were holding their arms out to the boy, who ran towards them eagerly. Why you think that was enough to take me down? The giant rumbled, getting to his feet and looming over the blonde with a snarl. Turn and face me you coward. There's no need, Koryu muttered, shooting the giant a look of neutral disdain as he did so. I already hit your tenketsu, oh my wa mo, Shindiru. What in the hell are you? The man growled, only to gape as his arms suddenly wrapped around him of their own free will, making it look like he was hugging himself. Hey what th? Hokuto. Suken Jizai Ken. Koryu intoned, eyeing the struggling giant dispassionately as he spoke. Your arms will continue to constrict until they tear your muscles apart, snapping your spinal cord in the process. He glared at the man as he spoke. Go play with the devil in hell. Help me or rrghphrglebleh. The giant squealed, even as his own back erupted in a burst of blood, tendon, muscle and bone, terrifying the onlookers, be they invaders or defenders. Koryu, the only one unaffected, stepped over the mangled corpse with nary a second glance, before moving into a fighting stance. Who's next? And so Koryu's adventure continues. Will clashing with the Otonin awaken his dormant memories? Will Hiyashi be able to repay his debt to Naruto? What will happen when the Hokuto Shinken collides with the Tenfuin? Koryu. Omae wa mo, Shindiru, translation. Hokuto. Suken Jizai Ken, literally translates as North Star, tendon pulling will fist. By striking the chest with a monkey paw-like strike, the user can cause an opponent's arms to contract, literally hugging anything caught between them to death. Kenshiro used this against two attackers, who proceeded to hug one another until their organs burst and their spines were crushed. R&R. Chapter 7. A little early I'll admit, but seeing as how popular this one was with the reviews, I figured I'd give you all a little treat. Thank Kami-sama for anime uploads, otherwise DVE never been able to continue this Also, several plot holes have been brought to my attention. Subo vs Tenketsu. Hokuto no Ken uses Subo, which control the actions of the body, if I have used the word Tenketsu, which refers to the nodes that dot the chakra passages, then please ignore this, as the correct word is Subo. Kusagaku is supposed to be on the other side of Konoha, but a map I checked on shows that it actually shares a border with Wave, Rain and Fire Country Taki, Amen Hai no Kuni for those that want to get specific. As such, it will remain like this for the rest of the story. That said, the crowd have spoken. We demands more headsplosion. And so you shall have them. Naruto. Konoha Shinken. Chapter 7. Silent Maelstrom, Raging Sounds. Who the hell is this bastard? One of the Otonin wondered. Staring from the remains of their giant comrade with palpable alarm, what the hell did he do? Calm yourselves, the man in the faded kimono ordered, reclining on a lounge chair his followers had taken from the teacher's staff rooms. He is but one man, that idiot just happened to let his guard down. His followers, though not fully reassured, were at least calmed enough to take the situation into better consideration. The blonde stranger was indeed one man, while they were, at least 10 strong, not including their leader. However, in the world of shinobi, numbers meant little, as one Junin class opponent was the match for at least 20 Chunin. They may have reverted to being nothing more than common bandits, but every one of the invaders had, at some point, been a shinobi of Otogakur, and so knew that appearances were always deceiving. For all they knew, this guy could be a wandering nuke nin that decided to play Good Samaritan. That was pretty good, the kimono wearer called out, applauding the man with mock appreciation. Truly a masterful stroke, clearly we have a master taijutsu specialist amongst us. He rested his cheek on his fist. Tell me, stranger, what's your name? Quote, your death. The blonde replied, already walking towards them at a sedate pace, cracking his knuckles in readiness, the sound echoing in the silence. My death you say, the leader of the raiders repeated in mock terror, actually drawing a laugh from his men, really? My God. Raising his free hand with a regal air, he snapped his fingers, kill him. At once, 2 men leapt from the group, a set of kusarigama held in their hands as they encircled the blonde, halting him in his tracks as he paused to glare impassively at them. Hey, dumb shit doesn't know to be afraid, one of them cackled, his face covered by the standard Otogakur face mask. Soon fix that, the other agreed, his face half covered in bandages, before hurling the chain weapon at the blonde alongside his partner. The opponent merely tilting out of the way to avoid them. Pretty good, the face mask sporting one applauded, sounding amused. Most people don't last past the first strike. He grinned under his mask, but the second's the keeper. Koryu frowned as the maggots encircled him, the rattling of their chains making them easy to pinpoint to his honed senses. Taking a breath, he moved into a cat stance. Arms raised partially above his head, palms facing his ears. Again the chains lashed out, only this time, rather than dodging the attached sickles, he grabbed them by their hilts. Baka. The bandaged one leered, twisting the chains tightly, causing them to wrap around the blonde's arms as he leered, you walked right into it. We're going to rip your arms off. The face mask sporting one added, pulling the chain tight as he did so. This is what you get for acting so cool. Is this supposed to scare me? Koryu asked, his tone as calm and collected as ever, as if being bound in chains meant nothing. Which, in actual fact it didn't. Ryu-sensei had tied him up with worse. Of course it is dumbass. The bandaged one cackled, yanking the chains tighter as he spoke. His visible eye bulging with glee, you think you can get out of this? Then try it, if you insist. Koryu muttered, his chest rising as he inhaled, concealed by the thick poncho he wore. His muscles swelled, the chains surrounding his wrists creaking, barely able to contain the swelling muscles as he gripped them in his hands. What the duo yelped, even as they felt themselves being dragged towards the man. What are you doing? Guua! Koryu yelled, snapping his arms together in such a manner that his assailants were yanked off their feet, still holding onto their chains desperately even as their eyes widened in terror. Holy shii. Their scream were cut off as their skulls collided, shattering like overripe melons under the sheer force of the blow. Blood and gray matter splattering to the ground in a grisly rain as Koryu snapped the chains binding him and continued to advance. Make way there, the captain of the guard barked, pushing to the front of the mob with his men. Only to gape at the situation before him in confusion and horror. What the hell happened here? Taiko, one of the Chunin on scene called out, obviously relieved to say. Him as he pointed at the blonde stranger that had been wrecking havoc for the invaders. That man started fighting the Otonin. They have hostages. A second chimed in, drawing the captain's attendee onto the caged children with a scowl, but he's already taken down 3 of them. Then what in the hell are we waiting for? The captain barked, hefting his spear with a purposeful air as he did so. "Let's give him some backup, lads." "I wouldn't if I were you," a calm, collected voice opined, several men leaping aside as Karasu appeared in the midst like a ghost, albeit a well-dressed, exceedingly polite one. "Why, you're the one from the gate," the captain noted, eye widening in recognition of the albino assassin that had decimated the invaders with barely a hair out of place. "You helped drive them off." "It was no trouble, I assure you," Karasu stated calmly, his arms folded in his kimono sleeves, "but you need not concern yourselves with this fight." "What are you saying? Our kids are in there," one of the guards exclaimed, pointing at the desperate children. "Not only that, your friend may be strong, but there's a Tenfuan user in there too." "A Tenfuan," Karasu repeated, looking sharply at the man, concern and intrigue battling for control of his eyes, before returning his gaze to Koryu as a new challenger stepped up. "Interesting. Who's next?" Koryu called out, his eyes having turned to their impassive glare as he advanced on the awestruck invaders. "Or have you decided to die peacefully?" "How droll," the one in the kimono chuckled, though there was a hint of annoyance in his tone as he tilted his head. "Anyone think they can do better than those two?" "With pleasure," one of his men cackled, stepping forwards with a stout, iron staff in his hands, twirling it around expertly as he grinned. "Hey, pretty boy, you think you're hot shit 'cause you took out that tub of lard and those rejects?" He spat to the side, bringing the staff down on the limp form of a Kusa Chunin. "Shattering the corpse's skull. I was a staff master back in Odogakure. I was easily Chunin ranked." As if to emphasize this, he twirled the staff in such a way that it seemed to vibrate, slamming it into the earth in such a fashion that rather than breaking, it shattered, leaving only dust and slivers of stone. "How's that? I've killed plenty of little shits like you with this," the man boasted, pausing with the staff held in one arm behind him. "Blocking my staff won't do you any good, even a glancing blow will rattle your bones." "Am I supposed to be impressed?" Koryu asked, looking at the man with his cold, calculating eyes. "Hurry up and come at me if you can. I didn't come here to listen to idle boasts. In a hurry to die are we." The man chuckled, spinning his bat one more as he spoke, before lunging forwards. "Then take this." Quote. Koryu frowned, stepping back expertly to dodge his opponent's strikes, noting that the man wasn't bluffing in his ability to wield the weapon, as some of those blows had almost clipped him before his guard came up. "I underestimated him," the blonde admitted, a frown marring his features as he ducked under a swipe and slid past the man. "A costly mistake, not one I can afford to make too often." "What's wrong?" the staff master called out mockingly, his staff like a wall of vibrating metal in his hands. "Where'd all your tough talk go, big guy?" He leapt back, putting some distance between them as he leveled the end of the staff at his opponent like the tip of a fencing saber. "Shiny." Koryu frowned, leaping aside as the tip of the staff jabbed into a wall, missing him by a foot at least, only for his eyebrow to quirk as it drilled right through the construct, leaving a single, circular hole where it passed. What do you think of that?" the staff master called out, a smirk on his features as he twirled the staff behind him, palm outstretched in a pose, all the force of the blow is delivered at a single point. With no wasted power. He smirked as the wall fractured, before crumbling to dust, causing the entire side of the building to collapse. Of course, the vibrations are directly delivered through the wound as a result. He leered at the blonde confidently. "You get it now. I won't just break you. No, I'm gonna crush you to powder." "Hokage-sama," Shizune called out, bursting into the office to find her aging master shifting through documents, a request for backup from Kusa. "What do they need us for?" Tsunade grumbled, sounding more than annoyed. "Kusa and Konoha have never had anything in common, nor any form of tie outside the non-violence charter drafted after the war. They're being invaded by remnants of Odogakure no Sato," Shizune reported, instantly snapping her master out of her mood, a serious scowl adorning the Godime's face. "Also, their Junin are currently off on missions, trying to fortify themselves against the rumors of a pending war." "Idiots," Tsunade muttered, glaring at the missive as it was handed to her, eyes narrowing as she read the details. "Even if we set out now, the raiders would have a day on us to escape." Scowling, she looked up at her assistant. "What teams can be spared?" Team Kurenai is still in wave, overlooking the repairs. Shizune reported dutifully, reading off a clipboard. Team Guy was dispatched for patrol duty yesterday, and are set to return in a week or so, with my own cell. With Genma Rado and Aoba, having been relieved of said duty. She flipped through the papers. However, Team Ebisu and Team Asuma are both on standby. Asuma and Sensei's grandson's teams Tsunade noted, a smirk crossing her features as she recalled the two Sarutobi males, one a chain smoker, the other a prankster. Both reminded her of two of the greatest influences in her life. And two of the people she'd lost, in different ways. Sensei may be gone, she allotted, Asuma's and the late Sarutobi Hiruzen's features intermingling, shortly replaced with Konohamaru and a certain blonde knuckle-headed genin, but Naruto. Tsunade-sama, Shizune called out, a little concerned for her mentor as she trailed off into unusual silence, as she was wont to do as of late. The Godime snapped out of her thoughts, eyes hard as she looked at her former apprentice with a nod. Assemble teams Asuma and Ebisu for an A-rank mission immediately. Tsunade ordered, have them briefed and sent out on the double. Yar yar, Asuma muttered, shaking his head as he dropped off little Hiruzen at the academy. I don't see how you've kept your sanity for so long, Uruka. Teaching 3 brats was tough enough. But they'd had prior training. Yumino Uruka merely chuckled and scratched his scar in embarrassment. It wasn't often that a Junin complimented a mere academy Chunin instructor. Especially not a member of the vaunted Sarutobi clan, and a former member of the Niju Shodai to boot. Still, Hiruzen-kun really takes after his grandfather, doesn't he? The Chunin noted, watching. As Asuma's son broke up a fight between 2 other boys, getting them to make up before joining them for a game of tag. Kid's a diplomat in the making, just like the old man was. Asuma agreed, lighting up a cancer stick, chuckling at Uruka's pained glance. Come on, I don't smoke around the brats or in the house anymore, the least you can let me do is indulge in the fresh air. I suppose, Uruka lauded, it's just kids are impressionable at this age. I'd rather they started thinking smoking is cool, because they saw a Junin doing so. Relax, I've drummed the evils of smoking into Hiruzen's head enough that if he does smoke, it's his own decision, Asuma assured the man, eyeing his son with a look of pride. Graduation's coming up soon, right? Uruka agreed, a wistful smile crossing his features as he watched over the kids from the gate, recalling every student he'd seen off over the years. Time does fly. Tell me about it, Asuma chuckled. 15 years ago the only way to motivate my team was to either treat him to yakiniku after a mission or have Ino scream at the boys till they did as she told them. And now, Uruka asked, chuckling at the knowing, self-mocking look in Asuma's eyes as the Junin extinguished his finished smoke under his heel. Well, we still go out for yakiniku, Asuma admitted, tossing the crumpled butt into a litter bin, but at least we can split the bill 4 ways now. Ino's calmed down a little too. By the way, how's she and Choji been getting along? Uruka asked, smirking at Asuma's quirked eyebrow. Oh come on, you think I don't keep my ear to the ground? I honestly can't say, Asuma replied, though the look on his face implied he wanted to badly, but I can tell you this, Inoichi and Shuza are absolutely over the moon about it. I'll bet, Uruka chuckled, recalling seeing the 2 clan heads prancing down the street one night, singing about the joining of houses whilst swinging sake bottles around. Their conversation was too short as an anbu dropped in between them in a crouch, bowing towards Asuma respectfully. Sarutobi, Asuma dono. The crow-masked nin addressed the Junin. Tsunade-sama requests you and your cell to assemble at the Konoha gate immediately. Bring all equipment necessary for an extended mission to Kusagaku. Finally, Asuma sighed, a lazy smirk on his bearded face as he popped his shoulder joints. With a grunt, I was wondering when I could cut loose. I'll see to it that Hiruzen-kun gets home safely, Uruka assured the man, knowing that there were a few unscrupulous parties that would love to get their hands on a member of the late Sandame's clan, and not just from outside the village either. Yo, Asuma Jichin, Sarutobi Konohamaru called out, waving as his uncle popped into view next to his team via Shunshin. Barely a second behind the arrival time. Konohamaru, Asuma greeted, smiling at his blue-scarfed nephew with the fond air he reserved for family and close friends. looks like we're working together this time. Hi. The Chunin saluted, grinning in a manner oddly reminiscent of a certain loudmouth genin that had influenced most of his generation, not to mention a few of his elders. Konohamaru-kun. Ebisu coughed. Though he could understand the honorable grandson's excitement, he himself was a little eager to get underway after being cooped up so long in the village. We've been cooped up for so long, Ino complained, stretching in a way that drew looks from Ebisu's cell, lecherous from Konohamaru, and Ebisu himself, though he chastised himself for it, and envious from Moegi, who was still only just filling out. Don't see what the big deal is, Shikamaru muttered, the lazy Junin letting off a yawn as he popped his neck joints, thumping a shoulder with his fist to get the blood flowing. All right, listen up, Tsunade called out, snapping everyone to attention with her tone as she stepped into view, Shizune at her side. You're about to embark on a mission to assist in a bandit raid on Kusagaker. Normally we'd leave them to it, but it seems Otogaker's remnants are involved, and other than Konoha and Suna, no other village is used to their tactics. Tell me about it, Shikamaru muttered, recalling his first time as team leader, and the disastrous follow-up. 2 men critically injured, 1 presumed dead, and not only that, the mission had ended in failure. All because of Orochimaru's lapdogs. As such, I expect you to treat this as an A-rank mission, Tsunade continued, assist the Kusagaker Chunin in their defense, but other than that imply kill as many of those pests as you can. The group shivered at the coldness in the Godime's tone. We made the mistake of letting Orochimaru run ragged years ago. He may be dead, and good riddance in my opinion. But he left enough skeletons in the closet to keep us busy for some time, not the least of which being the Tenfuin bearers. Choji and Shikamaru winced, both having had prior experience with Orochimaru's little gift, for those he deemed worthy. It basically boosted their chakra tremendously, whilst altering their bodies into demonic freaks, bound to the serpent's will. Also, Tsunade muttered, drawing everyone's attention back to her as she pulled out some sheets of paper. Whilst there, keep an eye out for someone matching this description. He was sighted in Wave Country, and apparently drove off the Tosei Nin there before our forces arrived. Asuma whistled, having heard the gist of that mission from Guy before the man had started preaching on about youth as usual. Apparently some unknown taijutsu specialist had come in and cleaned house by himself, without asking for a reward. While admirable, it had the adverse effect of inspiring Guy to new heights of training, which he'd go on and on and on about until someone either knocked the man unconscious to shut him up or distracted him long enough to make a getaway. Mendokus, Shikamaru muttered, noting how long he description was with a grimace. Pretty thorough, weren't they? 6'5", whirlpool scar over heart, he winced, that had to hurt. Blonde, blue eyes, whisker marks. He trailed off, his lips open and yes widening along with everyone else's at that last comment, Konohamaru actually freezing in place at the words. No way, Choji muttered, looking at his best friend in disbelief and, if he dared to say it, a little hope. You don't think this is the second half of your mission? Tsunade informed them, holding her elbows in a way that seemed authoritative, but the Junin easily knew was to strain herself. Find out anything you can about this. Koryu, person, consider it an S-rank reconnaissance mission. Koryu scowled, eyeing the staff master warily as he drew closer, hands held in a ready stance. Well, you scared yet, pretty boy? The man cackled, twirling his weapon about him in a blatant display of assumed superiority. Wanna piss your pants? Pray to God, if you hunker down and beg for mercy, Aniki could let you become his boot cleaner. Koryu merely scowled, gesturing with his hand for the man to come closer, earning an annoyed grunt from the man. Little shit, he growled, rearing his arm back for another thrust. The edge of the staff rotating towards the blonde, shiny. Everyone watched with bated breath as the tip raced towards the poncho-wearing blonde, only for their eyes to widen as his hand snapped out, apparently trying to block the staff with his hand. Baka, the staff wielder cackled, his glee evident on his face as he upped the power of his thrust. I'll punch through your fist and shatter every bone in your arm. Koryu did not reply, he merely held out his palm, fingers straight, as the end of the staff collided with a meaty thwack, only to suddenly stop in its tracks. Steam and the smell of hot flesh rising from it. What the wielder yelped, eyeing the scene before him in disbelief. That's impossible. Your hand? Why didn't I pierce your hand? He went to pull back, only to find he couldn't, for Koryu had gripped the end of the staff with the same hand he'd used to block. Kisama, you forget the basics of your technique. Koryu intoned, his eyes as deep and murderous as a stormy sea. No matter how fast it rotates, the tip of your staff is still blunt. That means the tip doesn't rotate as much as the main body. Before the stunned man could say another word, he felt his feet leave the ground, eyes widening in horror as the blond man lifted him off the ground, the end of his staff placed firmly into his stomach. Help, he called out, legs kicking humorously as he fought to keep from impaling himself on his own weapon. Someone get me down from here. As you wish, Koryu muttered, tossing the staff, and its wielder by proxy, into the air with one hand, before leaping up after the man, his fingers flying for his neck, digging in up to the second knuckle. As the man gagged from the blow, a hash knee to the face shattered his nose, sending him hurtling towards the ground face first, whereas Koryu landed with the grace of a big cat, watching as the man stumbled to his knees. That was it. The man chuckled, gripping his weapon and using it to clamber to his feet. I've squashed kittens with more bite than that. He scowled as the blonde turned away from him towards the rest of the bandits. Hey! Turn back here, coward. There's no need to. Koryu muttered, not even turning to address the man as he advanced on the remaining raiders. Omae wa mo, Shindiru. The hell are you, Dabu? The man snapped, only to cut off mid-sentence as his skull distorted, followed by his neck forcibly twisting to side with an audible crack, blood spraying from his eyes, nose and mouth as he collapsed, still holding his weapon. Hokuto, Koryu intoned, walking towards the stunned bandits like some unstoppable juggernaut. Kushu Hagen Ken. He pointed at the leader, gesturing with his other hand in a beckoning motion. Next, quote, Aniki, one of the remaining Otonin stammered, gaping at their opponent in horror as he backed away, only to spasm and fall on his face, a kunai lodged in his neck. Useless wretch, the man in the kimono muttered, glaring at the figure on the floor as he spoke. How dare he retreat? He shot the others a look, and just in case you're all thinking of doing the same, know that I never forget a face, and if I have to get off my seat to deal with this myself, I'll be very annoyed. 4 men, torn between the uncertain death of facing their opponent and the certain death of displeasing their leader, rushed Koryu with their weapons drawn, screaming for blood. The 66th successor merely glared, not moving from his spot, before lashing out with a savage kick that struck with pinpoint precision, following the motion up by leaping over their heads to stand behind them. Hokuto, Shihuzan, Koryu called out, followed by the 4 men screaming as their bodies exploded outwards into piles of blood and offal. He eyed the remaining forces coldly, turning to level his glare at the apparent leader as he reclined on his seat. Well now, said leader muttered, annoyance in his tone as he sat up from his reclining position, it seems I need to rethink my hiring polices a tad. Aniki, one of the remaining thugs insisted, standing in front of the man, with his arms stretched wide in a placating manner. There's no need for you to dirty your hands on this guy. We can. You're in my way. The man growled, backhanding the poor underling. Sir Prison. Everyone as the man's head separated from his shoulders from the blow. Such incompetence. Rising regally to his feet, the man walked towards Koryu at a sedate pace, like a king advancing on a courtier. His men backing out of the way with looks of fear. I must commend you, sir. The man applauded, though his tone held no sincerity. I don't get off my seat to handle anything these days. You're he first person I've had to deal with personally outside my underlings in almost a year. That's a year you didn't deserve to live. Koryu muttered, his arms at his sides under his poncho. Come on down here, it's time for you to die. Die. The man chuckled, slowly slipping the top of his kimono off to reveal his bare torso, a strange tattoo on his neck. You think it's my time to die, do you? Hi. Chuckling deepened ominously as strange markings made their way across his neck and chest. What the hell? Koryu exclaimed, eyes widening as the markings, glowing a dull red, slowly covered the man's features in a wave-like pattern. That marking. You're pretty special. That hauntingly familiar voice noted with wry amusement, flame-like tattoos crawling over the owner's skin, slowly too. RNING it gray, but I'm more special than you. No doubt about it, the 66th successor muttered, watching as his opponent's skin changed from normal flesh to a bizarre gray-black. I know that mark from before. Are you surprised? His opponent called out, stretching his arms wide as the transformation drew to a close. He now resembled some sort of half-man, half-Komodo dragon creature, his eyes golden and reptilian. Is this your first time witnessing such power? Where did you get that mark? Koryu ground out, his eyes unusually serious, the intensity actually causing the lizard man to back up a step. Tell me now and your death will be painless. There you go with that death thing again. The monster muttered, annoyance and pride in its tone as it pointed at him. Let me tell you something, you uneducated lout. It is not you who shall be doing the killing this day, but I, Ryuma-sama. And so the battle lines have been drawn. Will Ryuma's claim of victory hold true? Or will the light of the Shisei shine over him? Koryu. Omai wa mo, Shindiru. Glossary. Hokuto. Ursa Major, the Big Dipper, otherwise known as the North Star. Tenfuan. Heaven's Seal, known as Orochimaru's Cursed Seal. Or the Hiki from Hell, as I like to call it. Kushu Hagen Ken. Neck twisting, face breaking punch. Which has got to be a typo, because I swear to crap he kneed the guy in the face. Hokuto. Shihu Zan. Four-way slash of the North Star. Also, I've been deep-patting this with myself for some time now. Should Koryu Naruto, for the purpose of disguise during his travels, grow a Jesus beard Lee? Kenshiro had during the beginning of the Hokuto no Ken anime movie. I'm personally all for it, the whisker marks are a dead giveaway to anyone that knew him. Send you vote, either YN, in a review, with reasons why. See ya next time. Chapter 8. Sadly, it seems Jesus Beard-sama will not be turning up for a while, as more than enough people talked sense into my head. And I agree that since he's trying to find his past, growing a beard would be detrimental to Koryu's efforts, even if he'd look badass. Also, it turns out there's a name for that weird, poncho cloak thing Ken wore at the start of the movie and series, hikimawashi. Usually made from oiled leather, used to keep out rain on the road, but it also doubles well as a traveling cloak. Hallible. You've been reading too much Kurigane. Kyugen. What? Jintetsu's cool. I own nothing but my laptop and soul, mostly. Chapter 8. Shikamaru. Choji called out, drawing his friend's attention as they leapt side by side through the Trito. P.S. Towards the border between Konoha and Kusa no Kuni, do you really think it's him? I honestly don't know, Shikamaru muttered, feeling a guilty stab at the look on his friends' faces at his words. Logically speaking, there's no way it could be. Naruto would never stay away from Konoha for so long without contacting us. He frowned, but still, there's a part of me that wishes it is him. It'd be just like him too. Ino chuckled, a smile on her face as she recalled her fellow blonde in question with grudgingly fond memories, walking up to us after all these years, that goofy grin of his on his face as he makes up some ridiculous excuse, like getting lost on the way. Aniki would never get lost. Konohamaru countered, leaping past the Yamanaka Kunoichi with a scowl on his face, as if insulted by the very insinuation. I'll bet that Uchiha bastard took him prisoner and he escaped. Doubtful, Shikamaru muttered, though he'd admit the idea held merit. According to reports, Sasuke has never taken prisoners in a fight if he doesn't have to, and back then he had no reason to spare Naruto, if what we can gather from the retrieved tablet is to be believed. The elder shinobi shivered, whilst Konohamaru's cell, with the exception of a grim-faced Ebisu, blinked in confusion. After Sasuke's defection, Shikamaru had lead a team to gather as much intel on the Avenger as possible, trying to build a better picture of the youth they apparently knew jack all about despite having grown up with him. The results hadn't been pretty. They'd uncovered a proverbial rat's nest of deceit and treachery in the Uchiha archives. Not to mention enough material to have the entire clan stripped of their validity in Konoha. Sasuke's name was put on the kill on sight list for Anbu and Junin class shinobi alike. Something that had rocked his few remaining supporters hard. Sakura was doing so well at her training too, Ino muttered, recalling how her former rival had actually assaulted Sue. neighed with a scalpel when she'd learned of the list, though to be fair, the Pinkett had been emotionally unstable since the report that Naruto had been killed, apparently blaming herself for it. It hadn't stopped Tsunade from stripping the girl of her genin title for a few years, though thankfully the therapy had been fast enough that the demotion hadn't been permanent, and she'd quickly risen up to Chunin. We're nearing the border to Kusagaku. Ebisu called out, the shades-wearing Junin's authoritative voice snapping everyone's attention to the fore, where light was visible at the end of the woods, a good hour's run away. I suggest we go on high alert. Agreed. Asuma supplied, his lips pressed tight, foregoing his cigarettes for the benefit of the mission, his trench knives already in hand. Proceed with caution. And Shikamaru, put that brain of yours to use. We need a battle plan before we go running in chakra. Blazing. Mendokus. Koryu glared at the monstrosity before him, watching the dark, scale-like skin slide over the enhanced muscles, shifting into a ready stance as he searched it over for a weak point. Even from here, he could feel the corrupted energy of the creature's key paths. Akin to how certain martial arts relied on toxins or stimulants to provide a doping effect. Hokuto Shinken had similar techniques, such as the Sakatsu pressure points on the inner thighs, used by weakened or dying fighters to fight at full strength, but the cost was an extremely shortened lifespan. But this clearly reeked of the most foul, evil tampering, and was seemingly situated around a particular section of the neck. It was like there was a second key flow there, like a malignant tumor with a mind of its own. You should feel honored, O nameless wanderer, the monstrosity chuckled. Holding its clawed arms wide for emphasis, I only transform to deal with worthy opponents, so please try to make this interesting. Koryu merely scowled and loosened his stance, dancing on his feet in readiness for the first attack. Abruptly, the monstrosity was in his face, slashing and clawing at him with more power than skill. The moves had a hint of basic martial arts training, but it seemed that the monster preferred to rely on his strength to put his foes down. In that case, Koryu muttered, grabbing both of the monster's clawed hands in his own, their fingers are locking. Let us see how he fares against a stronger oppo. The smell of sizzling flesh reached his nostrils, the 66th successor of Hokuto Shinken leaping back, kicking off the monster to free himself from his grip. Before looking down at his scalded hands, the skin on the palms had been burned off. Now you see my power. Ryuma scoffed, clenching his fingers threateningly at the man. My body temperature in this form is so high simply touching me for a prolonged period of time can result in third-degree burns. He stepped forwards, the earth sizzling as dewdrops evaporated under his bare face. Not only that, he added with a reptilian smirk, but my scales are tougher than steel, not even the sharpest blade can pierce them. He smirked at his blonde opponent, noting the scowl on the man's face and mistaking it for desperation. Around this time, most of his opponents had either made for the hills or whipped out a few elemental ninjutsu, but then Ryuma, unlike most of the Otogaku remnants, was no mere one-trick pony. Before the blonde upstart could blink, he slammed his hands together in a tiger seal, his nostrils flaring as he inhaled, ribcage cracking outwards as his lungs expanded. Kaden, Ryu Jinna, a fiery stream erupted from his mouth, roaring towards his opponent, enveloping him in the white-hot heat. Around them, the people of Kusagaku cried out in alarm, and behind him, the captive runts screamed and tired once again to break free of their cage. Ryuma kept the stream of fire going for about 2 minutes, before cutting it off and smirking at the barren, rendered field before him. Stones cracking as they cooled, and small patches of grass still burning. Not even a corpse left, the Tenfuin user muttered, shaking his head in disgust as he looked over the destruction with a sense of dark pride and a mocking leer on his reptilian features. Didn't even last a minute. And here I thought dragons were a myth. Came a cold, calculative voice, Ryuma WH. Ipping round only to receive a boot to the face that sent him crashing through a wall, 10 meters away. Wah! What the hell? The monster stammered, raising himself up on the rubble, holding his Aki ing jaw and gaping at the sight of his assailant. I must admit you grow more interesting by the minute, Koryu called out, lowering his smoking boot to the floor as he spoke, the edges of his hikimawashi smoking from the flames of the monster's last attack. That being said, if spitting fire and being able to deflect steel is all you can boast, you're nothing. Kasama. Ryuma hissed, crushing a piece of rubble into sizzling pebbles between his clawed hands, before pulling himself from the rubble with a snarl, crushing the remainder of the wall to powder with his free hand. You dare to mark my face. Vanity is a failing, Koryu pointed out, his stance back up and his eyes impassive, deep and vast like the ocean, concealing the raging storm within that threatened to devour all that crossed it recklessly. But then, a monster would know nothing of human virtue. Ryuma snarled and, with speed that belied his appearance, leapt from the rubble and brought himself within striking distance. Koryu, rather than attempt to block the strikes, weaved around them with the natural grace of a dancer, Ryuma's expression going from enraged to positively murderous as the successor weaved around his strikes with apparently little effort. Face me, coward, the lizard man snapped, his fangs snapping just in front of Koryu's face. The blonde leaning back by instinct, which left him unbalanced for a precious second. Mine. Koryu, however, instead of righting himself, leant further backward and delivered a flip kick to the jaw that sent Ryuma's head cracking backwards with an intensity that caused several to wince. Only the Tenfuin's recuperative powers keeping his neck from snapping like a dry twig. What kind of strength does this freak have? The lizard man gasped, backing away slightly, moving into a loose but wary stance, even as Koryu flipped back onto his feet, his stance and expressionless face the same as ever. Damn it. What does it take to get a rise out of this guy? Koryu Dono is leading the match, Karasu noted, holding his chin, his other arm resting inside his kimono, as he watched the two warriors go head to head. However, he is not used to fighting Tenfuin users. And this one's gifts from that seal make it difficult for Koryu Dono to attack save with kicks. Not that meant the blonde assassin was any less dangerous, as Karasu could very well attest. The albino assassin's ribs still stung after receiving the man's kick back when they first met, but Koryu had admitted on the road that he'd been holding back to avoid a fatal injury. It felt like someone had driven an iron spike into my lungs. The albino muttered reproachfully, chuckling to himself at how humble his traveling partner could be. Oh yes, limiting himself to kicks will not be a problem. He narrowed his eyes at the fighters, and if he can hold out just a little longer. Fight me, damn it, Ryuma snarled, exhaling another gout of flame at the 66th successor, only for Koryu to leap over them and deliver a heel kick to the head that cut them off prematurely. Is running and dodging all you're good for? Going serious against an animal would be an insult to the 2,000-year history of my style. Koryu shot back, his voice as impassive as ever, which only proved to incense Ryuma all the more, the monstrous Tenfuin user's eyes slitting as rage filled his entire being. Doden, he roared, slapping his palms together in a ram seal, sending chakra through his feet into the earth. Doryutega. Koryu stumbled, eyes widening as the earth beneath him liquefied, becoming a flowing river of mud. Only his training kept allowed the successor to retain his footing, but by then his lower legs were firmly gripped by the mudslide. Mine, Ryuma jeered, lunging forwards and clamping his hands around the blonde's neck, the sizzling of burning flesh filling the air as her throttled his opponent. Finally got you to hold still. He mocked, tightening his grip as he chuckled. Not so talkative now, are you? Ah. Koryu grimaced, his teeth clenching tight from the feel of scalding heat. He felt small blisters form under the man's palms, bubbling under his skin as water as the talons dug deeper into his neck. Where's all your precious taijutsu and bluster now, smart guy? Ryuma demanded, getting in the blonde's face with a reptilian leer. Just try and get out of this. I dare you. Very well, Koryu uttered, even as the muscles in his neck tightened, Ryuma's eyes widening in shock as he realized he could no longer crush it. If anything, his hands were separating slowly. But just remember, you asked for this. What are you? The lizard man stammered, eyes widening as chakra began wafting off the man before him, the man's hikimawashi slowly burning and tearing away as the muscles beneath swelled with increased strength. Kasama. What are you? Most martial arts only make use of 30% of their body's potential, Koryu intoned, his eyes glowing slightly as he spoke. However, Hokuto Shinken enables me to draw out all 100%. Ryuma could only look on in horror as not only was the blonde before him growing larger by the second, but that the sizzling of his flesh had halted somewhat as well. The chakra, he realized. There's so much chakra in his flesh it's warding off my own. Another teaching of my art, Koryu revealed, grabbing the stunned Tenfuin user's wrists in his hands. Heedless of the steam wafting from them, as the use of anger to turn one's flesh into steel armor. Ryuma paled, struggling to release himself from the man's grip, Kikken. Ji-in writhing at him in a bid to free his trapped limbs. You have invaded these people without cause, Koryu continued, his voice deepening with rage with each word. You have threatened the lives of children. His eyes glowed a dangerous steel blue. You even killed your own men for displeasing you. Ryuma screamed, his wrists cracking audibly as Koryu tightened his grip round them, his fingers digging into the madman's flesh like hot knives in butter. To think a beast like you, the blonde snarled, tightening his grip further, could make me this angry. There was an audible cracking noise, followed by Ryuma's scream of pain and the squirt of flying blood. We're getting closer to Kusagaku's border, Shikamaru noted, only to sigh for the umpteenth time as they passed the same tree tr. 3 times, we should have been past the border some time ago, but damned if this place isn't a freaking pain to find. Hidden in grass, remember. Asuma reminded his pupil, his trademark cigarette. Taze extinguished as he ran alongside the Chunin cells, keeping a concerned eye on his nephew, who kept trying to race on ahead despite firm orders from Ebisu. Though he couldn't blame the kid for wanting to get there faster. Naruto had been the closest thing Konohamaru had to a brother role model when he'd been growing up. Hell, the boy probably taught his nephew more than he'd ever learned from Ebisu in regards to jutsu. He could still remember the look on the Godime's face when Konohamaru had used the blonde's harem jutsu during the Chunin exams preliminaries to take down his opponent by TRANS forming into an army of seductively clad copies of herself, an image that still brought most men to their knees at the memory. But that paled in comparison to the look on both her and Jiraiya-sama's faces when he'd used the Yondaime's Rasengan, apparently taught to him by Naruto some time after he returned with the Godime all those years ago, to take down a stronger candidate in the finals. In short, Asuma owed the blonde a very big debt. Not only had he motivated his team to improve with his performance during the Chunin exams, but he'd been there for Konohamaru when Asuma couldn't help him. The boy grow into the fine example of a Chunin he was today. And then Uchiha Sasuke stepped in and took him from us. Asuma noted bitterly, still recalling how devastated Konohamaru had been when Naruto was announced Kia. The boy hadn't even attended the makeshift funeral, instead trying to sneak out of the village to hunt down the blonde hellion, claiming Naruto wouldn't die even if he was killed. It had actually taken 3 ambush squads to drag the boy kicking and screaming back to Konoha, and that had been before he'd mastered Kage Bunshin, let alone Rasengan. And that was nothing compare to what Team Kurenai had gone through. Kiba and Akamaru, who'd been on the retrieval team, had taken the blow personally, as if they'd been the ones to let the blonde down. Shino, having been away for training with his father, couldn't help but feel powerless at not being there to help, wondering if he could have at least assisted in lightening his teammates' burden. And then there was Hinata. Asuma had seen many saddening things in his time, but the sight of the mourning Hyuga heiress had shaken his faith in the shinobi world harder than anything, even the sacking of the Niju Shotai. Nai actually had to insist the girl move in with her for a while until she was certain Hinata wasn't going to try anything drastic, to which Hiyashi steadfastly agreed. The Hyuga patriarch had only just gotten his family back, and wasn't about to risk losing it again. But Hinata had surprised them all by getting over her mourning with surprising quickness after a week, simply thanking Kurenai, albeit warmly, before returning to the Hyuga estates. Once there she'd hurled herself back into the Jukin training exercises, until even Neji was forced to pull out all the stops. The prodigy still won the majority their spars apparently, but it was always a near thing, and even he had to admit that Hinata's movements were infinitely more graceful than his own. Soon, all of the remaining members of Naruto's Genin class, including Guy's cell, had picked up on the heiress' determination, and threw themselves into their training with a zeal that surprised their parents. Shikamaru had rapidly climbed the ranks until he was a Junin in all but rank, and the official strategist for the Konoha Military Council. Choji and Ino had mastered their family styles and were actually improving on them. The budding romance between the two had bound their clans tighter together, much to their father's glee. Kiba and Akamaru had developed their teamwork and tracking skills to the point even Kakashi and his Hachi Ninken could barely keep up with them, claiming that there wasn't a spot in the whole of Fire Country they hadn't explored. Shino, while as taciturn as ever, had expanded his colony till the point he was, literally, a one-man swarm. Asuma had seen the teen in action once, standing in the midst of a field of black, as his beetles feasted off the chakra of an entire battalion of invading shinobi. And Guy's cell, well, they'd always, technically, been the best at what they did for their age, but now they were dominating their fields utterly. Neji's mastery of Juken had the Hyuga elders muttering in discontent, unable to act on their outdated opinions because he'd been taken under Hiyashi's wing. Tenten, pushed onwards by Tsunade's return, strove to master her craft until not only was she good at hurling kunai and the like, but it took guts to come near with anything other than a mastery of whatever melee weapon you had won you. And as for Lee, hell if Guy wasn't crying tears of joy at his protege surpassing him, he was crying tears of grief that he could no longer keep up with the teen. The kid was a godsend to those with similar conditions, helping out at the academy when not on missions, encouraging those with less than stellar genjutsu or ninjutsu that they could become shinobi if they put their all into it. "There's the border," Ebisu yelled, only to pull up short as several figures, wearing what looked like grass Hittite and the standard grass hats KUSA Nin liked to sport, leapt out in front of them, swords at the ready and threatening looks on their faces. It seemed they'd found their escort. "I'll handle this," Ebisu offered, stepping forwards and clearing his throat politically, pushing up his glasses as he spoke. "Good evening, sirs, we are from your allied nation of Konoha, here to lend our skills to the aid of your village in its time of need." "Border papers?" one Chunin asked, holding out a hand expectantly, earning looks of disbelief from the group. "Just following protocol. You think this is the first time people have snuck in? Gotta make sure we're escorting the right backup." "But of course," Ebisu agreed, sending a warning glare towards a sarcastic Shikamaru and an impatient Konohamaru, before rifling around in his pockets with a growing frown. "Let's see, where did I put them?" "This could take a while," Shikamaru noted numbly, watching with growing exasperation as Ebisu emptied the contents of his pockets for all to see, and showed no sign of stopping anytime soon. Mendokus. Back in Kusagakure, the shocked onlookers looked on in disbelief as Ryuma, still under the transformation of his Tenfuin, rolled around on the dirt, his arms tucked into his armpits as he continued to scream. Did he just?" the guard captain stammered, looking at the blonde figure that was staring coldly down at the former invader, the man's severed hands clenched between said blonde's fists like gaudy Halloween ornaments. "What kind of strength?" "Well, Ryuma-san did challenge him openly," Karasu pointed out smugly, though he had to admit he was a little amazed at the feat of strength Koryu had just pulled off. Superhuman or not, the human body wasn't so fragile as to be ripped apart like a paper bag. Koryu had merely squeezed the man's wrists until they'd exploded from the pressure, and then held on tight as Ryuma jerked back, the man's struggles effectively severing the limbs without any further effort on Koryu's behalf. Truly, Hokuto Shinken is a merciless art, the albino assassin noted, a thrill racing over him as his own wrists, and doubtless those of the onlookers, wincing in sympathy for Ryuma's suffering. "I doubt even I would have the stomach to face it twice, let alone attempt it." My hands," Ryuma howled, rolling awkwardly from onto his knees, his head pressed into the dirt as he tucked his bleeding stumps under his armpits to both stem the bleeding and attempt to numb the pain. "You took my hands." Man distinguishes himself from beasts by being able to use tools to subvert them to his will, Koryu intoned, glaring down at the pathetic form before him. "You, who are less than even a beast, have no right to such a luxury." Ryuma glared at him, his fangs clenching to the point his gums were beginning to bleed, steam rising off him as he inhaled a great gout of air through his teeth and nostrils. "So I'm less than a beast, am I?" he muttered, rising awkwardly to his feet, stumbling halfway but managing it with a stagger. "What am I then?" "Shit, yeah," Koryu nodded, his eyes cold as he beheld the beaten, haggard form before him disdainfully, even as he noticed the remaining invaders backing away further from the fight, fear in their eyes, even less than shit. "So I'm shit, am I?" The Tenfuin user chuckled, a hint of madness in his voice, even as he reared back and opened his mouth wide. Well then, at least I'm hot shit. Even as the flames erupted from the coward's maw, Koryu was already leaping overhead. Arms held out for balance as he soared through the air with the grace of a bird in flight, landing behind Ryuma in a ready stance. A swift knee to the spine arched the man's back, sending the plume of fire heavenwards, Koryu whirling round to the front, his fists already a blur of motion as he pummeled the Tenfuin bearer mercilessly. Ata ta 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 ta. Ta 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 ta. Ta 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 ta. Ta 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 ta. A fierce left hook to the jaw sent Ryuma spiraling into a wall, leaving a sizable crater as he slumped against it. The demon shook himself, a little dazed from the blow, glaring up at Koryuin. Opening his mouth to renew his flaming assault, only to choke as he realized, far too late, that not only was his chakra still building in his throat, but he couldn't breath out. Feeling a bit choked up, are we? Koryu asked, walking up to the struggling monster without fear. I struck the Hiko Subo, Zensho, it closes off your throat, allowing nothing to escape. GHK, HLP, Meg, Ryuma managed out. Gouts of flame appearing from his nostrils and tear ducts, his throat working desperately as his chest expanded from the buildup of chakra. His eyes widened as Koryu turned away, staggering forward, only to unleash a hellish scream as flames erupted from his eyes, ears and every other orifice of his body, reducing his struggling body to a stumbling, char-grilled husk within moments. Rekka, Koryu intoned, not looking back as Ryuma's remains crashed into the earth, dust and smoke trailing into the air. Gyukuryukin, the remaining bandits, watching on in horror as their leader was reduced to cinders, let out screams of terror. Throwing down their weapons and making for the hills, many of them screaming about the demon of the whirlpool, even as the villagers, after a moment's realiza. Tian raced to free the children from their cage, swarming around the man Akazio Anli, offering a brief look of odd terror as he walked away from the battlefield that had once been a playground. Pat, of what had once been a fine kimono fluttered through the air, before burning to a crisp on the breeze. And that pretty much ends Koryu's adventures in Kusagaku. Well, not exactly, he still has to try to leave after all. And what of the backup teams from Konoha? Will they make it in time to verify their suspicions? Or will Ebisu's bumbling slow them down? Ebisu. I resent that. Hannibal. Apache, Mira Rose, Sun. Frashin girls. Hi, Hannibal-sama, promptly beat Ebisu like a rug. Ebisu, pain. Hyugen. You're evil. Smirks at Hannibal's look, but then you're hot, so who cares? Hannibal. Pervert. Notes. Kaden. Ryujina. Fire style. Flowing dragon wave. Basically a glorified version of Sandame's Karyu Enden, Dragon Napalm. Rekka Gyukuryukin. Raging Flame Reverse Flow Fist. First used by Ken against a filler character. It basically does what was just described, closing off the throat so no air or fire can escape. You can still breath in, just not out. R and R, or we shall destroy the world with our anger. Hannibal. Oricon me. The end. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.